This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Jerry Sandusky, the assistant football coach at Penn State, who raped dozens of boys, children, over 2 decades, using his power and authority as a coach and a mentor to manipulate and sexually exploit and violate dozens and dozens of children. That is what Jerry Sandusky did, according to virtually every American, except for one. This is my interview with John Ziegler. God damn it, about 2 weeks ago or less, something came across the internet, and I think it was on Twitter. Someone just mentioned some article about a journalist named John Ziegler who had proven that Jerry Sandusky was innocent, and I had known nothing about this project, and apparently it was a project long in the making, and I immediately became fascinated and chased it down, and I chased down the guy who wrote this piece, John Ziegler, who's sitting in front of me in Los Angeles. And I want to say something about this case, but actually I'd rather that you say it. You said something before we started recording about what this is and how big and important this is to you. And you want to say that again?
Yeah, I have absolutely no hesitation in telling people with a very straight face, in 100% seriousness and certitude, that this is the most amazing story that has ever not been told in the modern media history. Period. End of sentence. What really happened in this case is, first of all, far more interesting and far more fascinating than the conventional media narrative myth. But it is also, in my opinion, the most important case of media malpractice, at least in my lifetime, certainly in the modern history of the news media. It's also probably the greatest injustice when you consider the number of people who were screwed by this, not literally but figuratively, that did not include a death. A direct death, at least. People could argue that Joe Paterno, Penn State's football coach, was killed by this because he died soon after all of this story broke. But I can't think of an injustice that I'm aware of a greater magnitude than this one. And the most amazing part about this, Thad, is this is not a case of reasonable doubt. I don't give a shit about reasonable doubt. I mean, I do, but this far gone from this story, I would not put my life, my reputation, my resources on the line for reasonable doubt. This case isn't even close. That's what the most amazing part is. That what really happened here is 180 degrees from what we were told, and it's not close. And anybody who has looked at this with a remotely open and objective mind, and many people have, I'm not the only one. There's been a book written about this by a guy by the name of Mark Pendergrass called The Most Hated Man in America. He has a slightly different theory than mine, and he doesn't have all the information because it didn't exist at the time of the book, but he has the right conclusion, which is that this was all wrong. I co-wrote a piece that was intended for Newsweek magazine in 2018 that one day day before publication, which was going to be the largest version of their story they've ever done of anything in the magazine and online. 15,000 words in the magazine, 20,000 words online. Ralph Cipriano and I had been commissioned for 5 months to do this. They got scared at the very last moment, one day before publication, after 5 months' work. They pull it. It's on our website, which is framingpaterno.com. That's figurative, not literal in the framing. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I despise conspiracies. In fact, the only conspiracy theorists in this case are the people that believe the conventional wisdom. In order to believe the conventional wisdom on this case, you have to be a conspiracy nut. And I am not. I'm a fact guy. I'm a truth guy. I have been throughout my whole career as a radio talk show host, as a documentary filmmaker, as a senior columnist for Mediaite now. It's all I care about is the truth. And the truth got lost in this case in a way that is so unbelievably unjust and so dramatic that it has been the greatest frustration of my life, and I've had many, that we cannot get this story into the mainstream. And I thank you for taking an interest in it, because it is an incredibly important and interesting story. The real story here is so much more interesting than what we were told.
So I vetted you because I needed to check in on you. And
I must have thought, oh, this guy's got to be crazy. Everyone presumes that. I understand it, but it's not. My wife might agree, but that's not true in reality.
No, I just didn't know how much of a journalist you were, and it turned out you were a hell of a journalist. And because I read your Newsweek piece, and it's a 56-page PDF document.
Yeah, I think it's 20,000 words, something like that.
Yeah.
Plus, I put an addendum at the beginning of it with some context and more documents.
So here's what's going on. They commissioned you. I'm assuming they paid you to write this, do this piece. You did this massive piece of investigative reporting, and then they pulled it a day or two before. That's nearly unprecidented. I mean, that's highly
let's be
unusual.
clear, because people think, oh, that sounds like bullshit. It's not bullshit. Here's what I mean by because people think, well, were they ever really going to go with it? Here's how set in stone things were. I had a conversation, because I'm a very proactive guy, sometimes to my detriment. I had a conversation with the guy who actually prints the Newsweek magazines, not the publisher, the actual printer, the guy in the factory. I said, are you going to print more of these in Pennsylvania? Because obviously there's going to be more interest, because this story revolves around Penn State. And this was about a week, maybe 5 days before we were supposed to go. He says, yep, we're on that. We're ready to go. And then about 2 days before publication, he stopped responding because we were emailing, I forget about the details of what we were emailing about. But the point is, that's how set in stone this was. We were told 2 or 3 days before publication that we had lost the cover to Vladimir Putin, and that was my first sign that, okay, this is trouble. Because if you're going to put this kind of resources, 5 months and 15,000 words into a story, it's usually the cover. We were told it was going to be the cover, but we got a hugely bad break just about a month or so before we went to publication, in that the guy who was the managing editor at Newsweek is a guy by the name of Bob Rowe. Now, Bob Rowe was key in all this because he had a relationship with Ralph Cipriano, the guy who was originally commissioned to do this story, and he brought me in because he knew I knew it way better than he did. But he had been leaked a whole bunch of documents in the settlements at Penn State. But Bob Rowe had worked on the McMartin preschool case. Oh, my God. And so he got it. He understood it. The McMartin preschool case, for those who don't know, turned out to be a scam here in California that was at least somewhat similar to the Penn State Sandusky situation, although there are differences. And I kept telling Ralph, I said, Newsweek is not in great shape. Anything could happen to Bob. And we lose Bob, we're hosed, because we're not going to find another managing editor willing to block for us on a story this toxic. We got to get it out. We got to get it out. Well, I'll never forget, since we're speaking 2 days after the Super Bowl, a day after last year's Super Bowl, Ralph calls me and says Bob got fired. He ended up getting fired because he had allowed an investigation of his own company. I don't know if you remember this, but Newsweek, there was the parent company was involved in some sort of scandalous behavior. There was computers that ended up being confiscated by the feds and all sorts of things. Well, Bob ends up getting fired for doing nothing wrong, and at that point I knew we're done. It's just a matter of the shouting. And if Bob had still been there, I think the story would have been published, because when push came to shove, in that 1 or 2 day period before publication, where that's the final. I mean, this thing had been fully vetted. The version on our website had been fully vetted. Mm-hmm. I was actually told by one of the editors there, we're going to send it to the lawyer. I can't imagine the lawyer having any problem with it, because we've never vetted a story as much as we vetted this one. Mm-hmm. Well, there was clearly pushback. I don't know exactly who the pushback was from, because I let Ralph be the point guy on that, because I knew my temperament was not conducive to a conversation with Newsweek about this, and he had worked with them before. He had published stories with Newsweek before, and in the end, with Bob Rowe gone, there's no one there with any skin in the game, right? So you know how this works. Anybody in the media business knows. If the boss is saying, I want to do this, it's amazing how everyone underneath is like, yeah, we got to do this. Mm-hmm. But when the boss is either ambivalent or no one cares, there's no one willing to put their butt on the line. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot easier. I mean, look, media jobs are incredibly tough to come by. No one wants to take a risk in this environment now, because if you take a risk and it doesn't work out, you get fired. You may never work again. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that journalism is in big trouble. I mean, there's still a lot of great journalism going on, but it's always safe journalism. John, this story was one that's never been safe.
John, why on earth would you choose to defend a pedophile, an accused pedophile? Why on earth?
Well,
why on earth would you choose to defend the most famous accused pedophile? Did you not know at that time? I want you to just pause for a second and think about it. Did you not know at that time that you were walking into a wood chipper?
Oh, I'm more aware of
You understand what this culture thinks about those people, right? And anyone associated with them. We put them not in the prison, we put them under the prison.
That I am more aware of the nature of the wood chipper than anybody. I've had at least one of my legs chopped off by this.
No, but did you know going into it?
Well, let's back up a second, because I think it's important for people to understand the context of how I got involved.
And who are you? And let's do that.
I mean, I have no connection to Penn State, Jerry Sandusky, Joe Paterno.
In fact, what did you say about the Nittany Lions when I asked you if you had a connection to Penn State?
Well, today, 7 years after the fact, they're my greatest rooting interest in sports. I root against them because I despise Penn State. I've met some nice Penn Staters along the line and become friends with some of them, but the way Penn State has handled this whole thing has angered me to no end, and people, I think, will understand that by the end of this interview. But let's just backtrack a second, because everyone always wants to know, well, why would he get involved with this? Who is this guy?
Exactly.
What's his angle? Mm-hmm. I have no angle. My angle is the truth, and here's how I got involved. When this story breaks in November of 2011, I'm a documentary filmmaker in Southern California. I'm probably most well-known nationally at that point for a movie called Media Malpractice, How Obama Got Elected. I had done a very, very high-profile interview with Sarah Palin, and I was on The View and The Today Show and every other television talk show to talk about that after the 2008 election. And I'm looking at this story and I'm thinking, okay, nobody knows the news media better than I do, because I've worked in every aspect of it. I've been a radio talk show host, a filmmaker, I've been a TV sportscaster, I've been a TV commentator. I mean, so I know these people. I know how they work. I know they're not that bright. I know they don't do their due diligence. I know they jump to conclusions. I know they love easy narratives. And I know that this type of story is particularly ill-suited for the news media to be able to discern what the truth is in a very short period of time. But I am not, when it breaks, thinking about Jerry Sandusky, the actual pedophile. I'm thinking about Joe Paterno, the head football coach at Penn State, who was fired dramatically 3 or 4 days, basically, after this whole thing breaks, based on nothing. He gets fired along with the president of the university, Graham Spanier, and 2 administrators effectively get fired as well, Gary Schultz and Tim Curley. And I'm thinking, whoa. This story, as we're being told it, makes no damn sense. I have coached high school football in a couple different states. I've covered college football and pro football for television. I've been in locker rooms. I know the coaching culture. I know football coaches exceedingly well. There is no chance, none, that Joe Paterno was told about a rape of a young boy by a former assistant coach who he didn't even like, Jerry Sandusky, and decided to do nothing about this or to cover it up to protect the football program. That is an absurd narrative on its face. Now, absurd things happen all the time. O.J. Simpson killed 2 people not far from where we're speaking.
That's right.
That's an absurd thing to have happened,
That's right.
that O.J. would do that. However, there's a fucking boatload of evidence that that's what happened,
Yes,
all right?
right?
So if you're going to tell me something that's ridiculous, you better bring some goddamn evidence, all right? And there's none. And
None.
7 years later,
None.
literally.
None. Okay, so let me just pause here for a second. You just said there is no evidence. And when we were on the phone the other night, you said to me, Thad, it's not even close. And that's when my blood ran cold. It's not even close.
This
and reading your work and having talked to many people since we first talked a few nights ago about you and this work, who have interviewed you, who have read the study, who have done their own due diligence and their own research, have said correct.
Yeah.
They said Ziegler is right about this.
It's not close.
It's not even close. The entire country believes in their bones that guy is a pedophile and deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life, which he will be, most likely, unless maybe we can do something about that. But
good luck.
In their bones, this country thinks that.
Oh, yeah.
And what he did was, in a sense, in our culture, almost worse than what Adolf Hitler did, right? There's nothing worse than being a pedophile in this country. And if you raped 36
men got money from Penn State.
I'm just saying, the allegations, if you rape 38 men who are poor, underprivileged youth who you bring into your program and then rape them in the showers on a regular basis for over a 15-year period, which is what the allegations were, correct?
Maybe even longer than that.
You are worse, I believe, in this culture than a Nazi.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing worse. And there's nothing worse. And by the way, I have 2 small children, a 6-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old daughter. I mean, it goes without saying, I'm against child abuse of every kind. It's abhorrent. The whole thing is abhorrent. And frankly, and this is important, even I was impacted greatly at the beginning by this bias that we all have, because I never even thought about Sandusky at the beginning. So this is important. So I started all this going, tell me about this Paterno angle, because it feels to me like Paterno is getting railroaded. Well, as I would later learn, this whole case is about the firing of Joe Paterno. Because if you think about this, folks, if you had been working for a legendary figure, and people that are not from Pennsylvania can't fully understand.
Yeah.
But the first thing you need to understand about this case is that Joe Paterno at the time was the most respected man in at least the modern history of the state. I mean, maybe Ben Franklin or William Penn. But
people always said he could be the governor if he ever chose to run.
Yeah, and so he is the most respected guy in the modern history of the state. Beloved, he's everybody's grandfather. He's 84 years old at this time, and his firing, and I didn't know this at the time, but it's now the key to the whole case. His firing effectively flips the whole case upside down. I refer to it as if you took the North Pole and the South Pole of planet Earth and you flipped the planet upside down. What kind of chaos would that cause? Obviously, everything would, implode. Well, that's what happened here. All of a sudden, everyone's incentives, and I mean everyone's incentives in this case, are flipped upside down. All the incentives become perverse. Up is down, down is up, good is bad, bad is good. And Penn State, and there's a headline in Business Insider the morning after his firing. Penn State is incredibly prescient. Penn State, and I don't know the exact wording, but effectively Penn State on the hook for $100 million in Sandusky abuse case, okay, because they've now effectively admitted they're guilty. See, when Penn State fires Joe Paterno, you fired Joe Paterno after 50 years based on nothing but a 23-page grand jury presentment that turns out to be utter crap and a misinterpretation of that 23-page document as it is. You fire him a week after he's become the winningest football coach in the history of college football, and just 3 days before he's supposed to play his last home game, which was going to be this great celebration of this 50-year head coaching career. He'd been at Penn State for over 60 years.
There were riots in the streets of State College, weren't there?
That's a little bit of a
There was some violence.
No, a television truck was overturned. Even that story is wrong. I have, from numerous people have told me that the media effectively provoked that.
Oh, my God. Really?
That the students were all being very quiet and silent and, kind of just gathering like, oh, my God, what just happened? Joe Pa got fired. And there were media people that were like provoking, hey, aren't you guys going to do anything? And, and it's not a coincidence that the TV news van ends up being the subject of the only real violence that there was, because the media coverage of this whole thing was insane.
Yep.
It was 24/7, 5-alarm fire. This was as big a story in not just sports, but in news that has happened in this entire decade, other than maybe Trump's election. I mean, this was as big as it's gotten in this decade, and other than 9/11, this millennium. And so anyway, the point of this whole thing is that the Paterno firing all of a sudden makes Penn State have a weird, bizarre, perverse investment in Jerry Sandusky's guilt. And this is so important for people to understand what happens here, because they can't get over this. People think, well, how in the world would Penn State fire Joe Paterno, their president of their university, 2 administrators, and pay over $100 million to these victims if this didn't happen? You need to understand that the people that did this, the board of trustees at Penn State, had not a fucking clue what was happening at that time. I've spoken to several of them. They had not a clue. All they knew was their house was burning down because of a media firestorm, and they decided, we're going to do everything we can to allegedly put the fire out.
Yep.
What they didn't realize was that they were blowing up a nuclear bomb over this fire. But here's the most important thing. Once that happens, the members of that board are now personally, deeply invested in the narrative being true. Because if it's not true, think about this. If it's not true, you have just defined your life as being someone who railroaded Joe Paterno and ended up killing him because he dies 2 months later.
Right.
So it's you are now as invested in this narrative as a 5-year-old is in Santa Claus. You cannot possibly fathom that you got this wrong. It is not within your comprehension. You cannot do so. And so these are the people that are in charge. So now everything that happens from then is based upon them accepting this narrative. And it's also important to point out, it's a state-run academic institution.
That's right.
That means it's not their fucking money.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
They are giving away other people's money.
Oh, my God.
To make themselves...
I hadn't even thought of that.
They're giving away other people's money to make themselves feel better and look better. Because what's the media doing? The media is praising Penn State. The leaders at Penn State are doing the right thing. They're realizing that football had corrupted their culture and allowed these poor children to be abused by this monster, Jerry Sandusky. And so now that's the narrative. Now that is set in fucking stone. And once Paterno dies 2 months later, now it gets even deeper, because we didn't just fire the guy. I think it's illogical, even though he had cancer. his spirit clearly had been crushed.
It sure seemed that way. Yeah. Two months later, he's dead.
2 months later, he's dead. So he goes from, in 2.5 months, he goes from being the all-time winningest football coach in history and about to be given the greatest send-off in the sports history to being fired, disgraced, and dead. And this is also important because, again, this is all part of the perfect storm here. I'm outlining the weather of this story. This is the weather. We'll get to the details.
Yes.
But the weather of this story is Paterno's firing. Everything is flipped upside down. People become invested in a myth. Paterno dies. They become further invested, but they're also incensed. And the entire this is a very rare, quote unquote, crime story where I can't even think of one that's similar to this. Where else in a crime story do you have the entire community where this happened being accused by the national media of having enabled the crime to occur? Okay, so now you have not just the school, you have the whole community invested in proving to the world we hate pedophilia. No, we didn't really do this. We didn't enable Jerry. We didn't know, but just to make sure everybody knows that we had nothing to do with this, we're gonna take Jerry Sandusky to the woodshed, and we are gonna put him. We're gonna give him not one continuance. This is unbelievable.
Wow. Not
one continuance for a trial. We are going to try and convict him 7 months after his arrest and Joe Paterno's firing, and in a trial that's not even 2 weeks.
Jesus.
And if you watch video of this thing, it's literally the Salem witch trials on steroids. There are hundreds of people outside the courthouse with everything but their proverbial pitchforks screaming for his conviction. Now, how the hell is a jury supposed to be remotely objective, especially in a case, and you know this because you've studied these cases, by and large, although some of them actually have hardcore evidence, this one did not, these cases are centered around the presumption of innocence. If you don't, as a defendant, if you don't have a presumption of innocence, you have nothing. And Jerry Sandusky's presumption of innocence was gone in 3 days once Joe Paterno is fired. He does a horrible Bob Costas interview because he's a terrible talker and frankly a moron as I've gotten to know him. He's not a bright guy. I shouldn't say bright. He is a very naive, naif-like character who's a bad talker. I've interviewed him for 6+ hours in 2 different prison interviews and on the phone. I've gotten to know him exceedingly well. Gotten to know his family exceedingly well. But the point, going back to my involvement in this, so for the first couple of years, I'm not even thinking about Jerry Sandusky all that much. I mean, I did write something for Bleacher Report like a week after this happened and it's actually, frankly, it's hilarious because 7 years later, it might still be the most accurate thing that's been written in anything close to the mainstream news media, where I'm basically saying, when you read this presentment, it's possible that Sandusky may have been overcharged and that some of this may not be true and some of this doesn't have a whole lot of strong evidence behind it, but I'm nowhere near saying Sandusky is innocent. I'm just saying, boy, let's be careful here, is basically what I'm saying. Let's be careful here.
That's what I said, yeah.
But I'm still not, it sounds like from our conversations, you had more suspicions about this case.
I was skeptical from the beginning.
But I was not. Yeah. I mean, interestingly, my wife, who is a school teacher who deals with 6th graders. She's been a 6th grade school teacher for a long time. That's interesting because 6th, 7th, 8th grade is the age of these boys when these alleged accusations, not when they occur, when the actual alleged acts occur, not when they talk about it. They don't talk about them until they're adults, most of them.
Right.
But the alleged acts occurred in that 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade time period. So my wife is very well acquainted with this age boy, and her first reaction was, no. Her just blink gut reaction is this just doesn't make sense. And I'm like, really? Are you sure? I mean, everybody couldn't be saying this. So it's important for people to understand, for context, as I get into this, I start with Joe Paterno. I do a documentary film called The Framing of Joe Paterno, which you can find for free at YouTube. No, not even any ads, because there's no ads on anything I do in this case. I've lost lots of money doing this case, and I never intended to do anything but lose money, although I wish I wouldn't have lost as much as I have. But the reality is we do this documentary film, which is really just the tiniest tip of the iceberg, because at that point I hadn't even spoken to Sandusky. And once I speak to Sandusky the first time in prison for 3 hours, and I'm presuming he's guilty as hell. I'm open to maybe some of this is exaggerated.
Wow.
I'm open to I'm open to what he has to say. But even if we've released much of the interview online. If you hear me at times, I'm being very very skeptical of him. I mean, I think at one point in the interview he says, "I'm just looking for a fair hearing." I said, "Well, Jerry, you're not going to get that. I mean, that's over with. It's done," because he's already been convicted at this point. And when I did that first interview, I actually recorded it. I don't know if it was technically illegal, but against the rules of the Pennsylvania state prison system, because you're not allowed to record interviews in Pennsylvania. None, zero, no video, no audio, nothing. And I'm thinking, if I interview Jerry Sandusky, no one's going to give a shit about what John Ziegler claims Jerry Sandusky is saying. So I actually snuck a recording pen. You're allowed to bring a pen and a pad of paper. And so I snuck a recording pen, which was comical because I did it very poorly. I kind of panicked and I super glued the top of the pen just in case they inspected the pen. They never inspected the pen. The pen recorded just fine, but then I couldn't get the super glue to dissolve, and so we had to destroy the pen, and I had to go to some tech expert here in LA to salvage the audio. But that's why I made my first Today Show appearance on this case, and in a very high-profile interview with Matt Lauer, because we gave them the highlights of that interview. And after that interview, let me be clear, I was presuming everything Jerry Sandusky told me was a lie. I mean, that was my default presumption. Everything must be a lie, unless it was verified in some other way or source or whatever. But when I got out of there, the first 3 hours, I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? This is not making any sense. I mean, I have been around. I mean, I'm a cynic. I don't believe anybody. I believe I'm a conservative who's law and order, believes everybody's guilty. And I'm not getting an ounce of guilt out of Jerry Sandusky.
You just said you're a conservative who believes in law and order and that everyone's guilty. That's sort of your default sensibility. I know you're sort of exaggerating, but that's your sensibility, right? Sure. That kind of person who's the opposite of me, by the way, which is great. I love that. But for this case, you saw the opposite. Well, so that's how credible you are, right? If
in a logical world,
let me just say, so just so you know, I've done a lot of episodes on this show about the sex offender registry, about pedophilia, about all these things, and I'm kind of a radical lefty weirdo hippie on that stuff that you probably wouldn't be very comfortable with.
Fine,
so, but I know it doesn't matter. So, but just on this particular case, we agree and we're in coalition on this. But if I had done this story, right, my bias would have been the other way around from the get-go, and I would have almost no credibility. You come at it from that perspective.
But you're using your brain, though.
This this sort of real conservative attitude toward it. That person, a conservative person from a conservative talk radio background, which is you, right, finds Jerry Sandusky, the biggest pedophile in the history of the world, to be completely innocent.
Well, I didn't.
Eventually,
but I think I'm even more credible than that, and here's why. Because it's not just my political sensibility. I'm also thinking about this from my own personal standpoint. In 99.9% of cases, if you discovered that a famous case was wrong or flawed, that's great for your career, right? As a journalist or a commentator, whatever. I'm very much aware that's not the case here. This is the last thing I want. In fact, I'm going through this, in retrospect, this fascinating psychological struggle after I get out of the first interview, because I'm thinking, oh, shit. Because I know myself well enough that I'm not going to be able to let this go if I think he's innocent. But I do not want to believe he's innocent, because I know this is going to fuck my life. And so I just to further your point about the inverse perspective on this, giving one credibility, I spend the next year or so trying to prove his guilt.
Oh no!
That's I went to Georgetown University. I come from the Jesuit background. You know, you take an idea, you attack it as much as you possibly can. If it withstands the attack, then it must be a good idea. Well, in that sense, I am desperately trying to prove him guilty. Because if I can't prove him guilty, then I'm going to be fucked.
Okay.
Because now I know myself, I'm in this very strange situation where I'm the only guy with the knowledge to do this, because nobody else wants this story. I'm the only guy that's interviewed him post-conviction. I have access to people in this story that no one else has talked to already. And I also have, and I don't believe in fate, okay? But if there was such a thing as fate, if I believed in fate, I was built for this case, okay? I know, because here's why I was built for this case. I have covered college football. I've coached high school football. I've lived in Pennsylvania, but I'm far enough from State College where I'm not in that whole deal. I was a Notre Dame football fan growing up, but I know enough about Joe Paterno to know this sounds like bullshit. I don't give a shit about what people think of me. I understand the way the media works. I'm impervious to media attacks. I've been attacked. So I am like, if there was a God, if God built a person to take this case on, it's John Ziegler. Okay, I am built perfectly.
Yes.
From every angle.
Exactly.
Every angle.
That's right.
I have this thing, well suited. But it's important people know I don't want him to be innocent. All right. I desperately do not want him to be innocent, because I know it's going to ruin what's left of my life. And I'm married at this point, and I got a young daughter who's basically the same age as this case. And so that's not what I want. Well, as I do this basically a second investigation, and instead of from the perspective of Paterno, I do it from the perspective of Sandusky. I can't do it. I can't even come close to doing it, because first of all, the number one thing people need to know vis-a-vis Sandusky is there's literally no evidence. Now, people think wrongly that, that's normal. These cases don't have evidence. That's bullshit, especially in the modern era, okay? I have, and I'm not the only one that has tried to do this, and if someone can correct me on this, please, please do. I don't believe that in the modern history, in the cell phone, internet, email era, there has ever been a serial pedophile that has been convicted without any of the following things. Okay, not one of the following things. Not a shred of pornography. Not a shred.
On his computer.
Anywhere.
Or anywhere.
Anywhere.
Because they seize his computer, right?
They got his computer.
Clean. Nothing. Zero.
And this is a guy who I know couldn't even operate his fucking cell phone.
Oh,
right?
my God.
Okay, so there's no way he somehow cleaned his computer of any pornography. Not a shred. And by the way, it gets worse than that. The prosecution implied, because they knew the media would do their work on this, implied that there was pornography by saying that they had found photos of the victims in his house. Well, that sounds really nefarious, right?
Right.
They're just fucking framed photos of him with a kid who he had a relationship with.
Right.
They're just like a normal, everyday photo. But people think, see, he had photos of these kids. Well, he thought he was their dad. Of course he has photos of them.
Right.
So no pornography. Now, one allegation, and these are all, and this is important, and I know the name. I'm one of the only few people in the world who knows the names and the identities of all 36 people who got paid by Penn State. There's not one of them that I can even get a hint is remotely homosexual. These are militantly central Pennsylvania heterosexual guys, okay? Not one allegation, forget about truth, not one allegation that's remotely, not at trial. There was not one allegation at trial of any alcohol use, any drug use, any payoff, Now think about all these other cases that we've seen, both involving, for instance, the Weinstein case or the Larry Nassar case or the Dennis Hastert case.
Yes.
Dennis Hastert, for God's sake, and I've never fully understand how this happens, but the former Speaker of the House ends up trying to pay off one of his victims, a male who he abused as a wrestling coach in high school.
Yep.
Very similar in theory to the Sandusky case. Years after he's even Speaker of the House, he tries to pay him off, like, I don't forget the money. The money was huge amounts of money, and that's how they end up catching him, because he's breaking banking laws by taking cash, too large amounts out of the bank. The point is, where is that in the Sandusky case? I mean, this has been allegedly going on for 30 or 40 years, him as a pedophile, and he's never plied anybody with alcohol. He's never plied anyone with drugs. He's never given them any money. No one asked him for money. No non-disclosure agreements like in the Weinstein case. No, so everyone just put up with this? Heterosexual boys, teenagers, just put up with this for 30 years, 40 years, depending on when you start the clock. And no one says anything about this.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Sure.
But you have to start off with the baseline of, where's the fucking evidence? There's none. This has been more investigated than any other case of its kind by more entities. There's been numerous trials. There's been
former director of the FBI conducted an independent investigation hired by Penn State.
It was not an independent investigation.
But I'm saying the former director of the FBI conducted an investigation.
Well, let me tell you what happened with Louis Freeh.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do with that. Because that's all part of the perfect storm here.
Okay.
So you have Paterno's firing, Graham Spanier's firing as the president of the university. Tim Curley and Gary Schultz, very well-respected administrators, are indicted basically for covering this up, which shocked the hell out of them, because they're like, what? And I want to talk about them later on. But you have Paterno firing, he dies, and now 7 months later, Sandusky gets convicted. Now, the Sandusky conviction in record time, I mean, think about 7 months. And this wasn't just 7 months. This was 7 months of hysteria.
7 months.
Of hysteria.
Between arrest and conviction.
No continuance.
That's astonishing.
Especially given
for a crime that allegedly occurred, a serial crime that occurred over a 30-year period.
Well, the trial accusations...
Or it's 15-year period, right?
The trial accusations would have been over about a 13-year period.
13-year period.
But think about this. You're in the middle of a massive media firestorm. Your community's being accused of enabling this horrible crime. You have a lawyer no one's ever heard of that Jerry sticks with because he's his friend, Joe Amendola.
Yeah, what's the story about this?
Joe Amendola is just a guy who's never done a case anything close to this, who Jerry knew, who was his buddy, a friend of his, had helped him get hired because they didn't think this was anything. They were stunned by the indictment. They thought this was all under control. They thought this was one allegation from one kid named Aaron Fisher who was not credible. And he ends up being, quote unquote, victim number one. And this goes on for 3 years, this investigation. 3 years before arrest. And they think it's all under control. Then all of a sudden this indictment hits in November 2011 alleging 8 different allegations, actually only 6 known victims, because 2 were quote unquote unknown because they didn't actually happen. The prosecution, we'll get to that later. But the point is, so they are in shock when this happens. And to me, I mentioned OJ already. OJ's guilty as hell. That's why he hires the dream team, because he knows he needs the dream team. Jerry's like, I don't need a dream team. I'm innocent. I'm going to stick with my friend Joe.
My buddy.
Right.
That's all I need.
So Joe is totally overwhelmed. He has no idea what he's doing.
Oh, Jesus.
He gets no continuances. And imagine they add 2 more allegations by the time trial comes. So imagine having 10 separate allegations over a 13-year period that you have to investigate with you and his co-counsel. By the way, his co-counsel doesn't even have a law license anymore.
Oh my
he
God.
went to jail for fraud after the trial. So this is the opposite of the dream team in every possible way. So imagine trying to investigate All of this under the best of circumstances, but we're not in the best of circumstances. We are in the exact environment. This is when our founding fathers created our judicial system. This was the exact atmosphere they feared for having a trial. They could not. In fact, I doubt they even could have comprehended an atmosphere worse than this to have a trial. And so the conviction happens in 7 months, but the conviction doesn't actually implicate Paterno,
right?
And it doesn't even really implicate the administrator. So the media is still, here's my interpretation, the media is still a little bit concerned that maybe we jumped the gun on Paterno, okay? Because frankly, people don't even realize this. Sandusky got acquitted. He only got acquitted on 3 counts.
Right.
This is a hanging jury, and even the hanging jury acquits him on the key count in the one episode that Paterno was told about. So in the media's mind, they're getting a little nervous, all right? Well, Louis Freeh, like the cavalry, comes in like a couple weeks later, and the timing of this is incredibly suspicious. There are emails, this is important, emails proving that the prosecution and Louis Freeh were in cahoots with each other, both on content and in timing.
Louis Freeh and who were in?
And the prosecution of Sandusky.
In cahoots.
So they're like literally rooting for each other.
Okay.
We need you to get your conviction of Sandusky so that we can come out with this, and we're going to come out with this right in the middle of summer so that the NCAA can act before the next football season. This is all, and I'm not a conspiracy guy. This is all people acting in their own self-interest.
Sure, okay? Of course, yeah.
So Louis Freeh comes out with this report, and you can almost see the news media out with their pom-poms. Like, go Louis, please Louis, we need you to come through with us because we're still a little concerned that we may have screwed this Paterno angle up. Well, Louis Freeh gives the people that hired him exactly what they wanted. And this is, people can't comprehend this because what do you mean? Why would Penn State want this? Again, we're back to the Board of Trustees being invested in this being real. And Louis Freeh has a long history of giving his clients exactly what they want. Google Louis Freeh and the soccer investigation and a couple of others.
Oh.
Louis Freeh is the guy who he is blown. Louis Freeh is a fraud. Okay, let's be clear.
Oh.
It's very clear to me and others who have studied this, and we have been leaked internal documents from his investigation. The very first page, you can see it on our website, framingpaterno.com. The first page of the Louis Freeh report work product has a handwritten note over the top of it that says, "No evidence to support this." And there might even be an explanation point. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But it's in capital letters in handwritten notes. This is the first page. Okay. And so Louis Freeh implicates Paterno and Penn State, and the media is having a collective orgasm. Thank God we didn't blow this. Paterno was even worse than we thought. This was horrible. Meanwhile, the plaintiff's attorneys, the attorneys for the victims, are literally high-fiving each other over Louis Freeh's report because now they know Penn State is fucking paying big bucks. They have Penn State by the balls, and they are thrilled. And it turns out over $100 million, it's somewhere in the $110 million, maybe more range, ends up going to 36 people, largely because Penn State, they don't just wave the white flag. This is way worse than waving the white flag. They curl into the fetal position, and partially because they're terrified of the NCAA. Because as soon as Louis Freeh issues his report, immediately in record time, because the NCAA is glacial in their speed normally, but we got a football season coming up. We need to get going here. This is the middle of summer, and so Penn State takes down Joe Paterno's statue. Why do they do that?
Right.
Because they're intimidated by the NCAA. The NCAA has said, look, you need to scrub yourself of any worship of Paterno because we're about to come down hard on you, and we may even give you the death penalty. And they're like, no, please, not the death penalty. What do you want? What do you want?
Explain the death penalty to the non-sports fans.
Okay, death penalty basically means your football program is going to be put out of business
for several years or forever, maybe.
Or maybe forever.
Yeah.
And Penn State, makes a lot of money.
Like no scholarship. You take all the scholarships away, and you're basically destroyed as a football program.
there's all sorts of possibilities. But Penn State was terrified that the football program was going to be ousted. They were going to lose a huge amount of money, and they were going to do whatever the NCAA wanted. So they take down the statue. They accept these penalties. These penalties were absurd. They were later revoked. People don't even know this. That for all intents and purposes, the NCAA ends up reversing a couple years later all of these penalties. Joe Paterno,
I didn't know that
because they exactly because it didn't get nearly the publicity. The Joe Paterno's wins, which had been expunged, were restored. He's now still the all-time winningest coach in the history of college football. There was a settlement on some of where the money went, but the scholarships were restored. So Penn State, this was. You have to understand liberal academia.
Yeah,
I mean,
I sure do.
Right, and liberal academia, no one's going to fight any of this. Okay,
Nope.
they have no incentive to fight any of it.
No.
They have an incentive because when they go to their cocktail parties, all these other liberals who fucking hate football. All right, these are people who hate. They hate the fact that football is the brand of their university.
Speaking as a former professor for 25 years, I can say absolutely that is correct. Yes.
So these are people who are loving this.
Oh, yeah.
Because for years they have been jealous of the football program.
Oh, yeah.
And to them, a college is about academia.
Oh, yeah.
And so all their liberal friends are going, oh, you guys have handled this
We did it
so well. You've been so, these poor victims and this horrible, you deserve so much credit.
And it confirms what we know about toxic masculinity in football, too.
Oh, of course,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Toxic masculinity is bad. And the other part of this, and this, it fits into the liberal mindset of what they think football is. But the other big picture part of this, which it's a little bit off the subject, but it's important to point out, and it's a good place to do it. Part of the perfect storm here is that all of this takes place in Pennsylvania after the Catholic Church scandal has been huge in Pennsylvania. And so because of that, that is the prism of the media and the public.
Yep.
They see everything. Oh, wait a minute. We've been through this before. We've seen this movie. And in fact, this movie already has perfect casting.
Right.
Because we've got Joe Paterno, who's an Italian Catholic, he's the Pope.
Oh, Jesus.
And we have the administrators, they're the cardinals. And we have Jerry Sandusky, he's the pedophile priest. And we have the Penn State crazy football fans, they're like the Catholic parishioners who turned the other way to protect their sacred institution because they didn't want to believe or they didn't care that there was this horrible child abuse going on because they want to protect their church, or in this case, their church is their football stadium. And that is a narrative that was very convincing to a lot of people. It's bullshit. Okay, and the first thing you need to understand this is bullshit. I can't tell you how many times I have been told and have seen in the media, well, these poor innocent children. By the way, it's important to point out they were at the youngest 11 years old to the oldest was like 16 years old. These are mostly post-puberty teenage heterosexual boys. And if you've ever been, as I have been, a post-puberty teenage heterosexual boy, this is not behavior that you're going to put up with in any way, shape, or form. But the reason why they put up with it, no, they didn't get any drugs, and they didn't get plied with alcohol, and they didn't get paid off, and they weren't homosexual like in the Catholic Church case.
Right.
People need to understand that. Most of the Catholic Church case is gay priests with boys who they either perceive are going to be gay or are gay.
That's right.
The vast majority of
correct.
this.
But
no one wants to talk about that.
I know. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
It's very politically
Dan Savage says it, but
But I grew up in a Catholic church
and a conservative Catholic.
I went to Catholic high school.
And you're saying this.
I was taught by gay priests, okay? And I was taught by some gay priests that in retrospect I think, I wonder what was really going on there. But the point here is that none of that exists here. So what did they use? They use this narrative that Jerry Sandusky was a god. He was a football god. And that therefore these football-crazed kids would do whatever he wanted because he had this magic power over them. Okay, I get it if you've never experienced college football that you might think that. But let me throw a few facts at you. Okay. First of all, there is no more powerful word in the English language than former. Okay, when you are a former whatever, no one gives a shit about you. Okay, okay. So when most of these allegations at trial occur, including the key one that was allegedly witnessed by a graduate assistant coach named Mike McQueary, occur when Jerry Sandusky is a former Penn State football coach. That means you have no power, no cachet. By the way, you're an assistant college. This wasn't jumping. You were the assistant. Now, he was a prominent assistant. He got credit for at least one of their 2 national championships because he was a very good defensive coordinator. Frankly, I have no idea how, because he's a slow, terrible talker and incredibly naive. But I frankly, my view as a football guy is that he was an old school type of football coach. He would not have been able to do it today. Today it's far too sophisticated for Jerry Sandusky, and frankly, that's partially why he retired early. I think the game was starting to get past him because he was very, very old school. Anyway, the point of all this is that not only was he a former coach, he ran a charity. Okay, and let's keep
the 2 mile charity,
the second mile charity,
second mile.
So let's be clear about this, and let's take this out of the theoretical into the practical. The number one allegation in this by victim number one, I've already referenced his name, Aaron Fisher, that goes on without any substantiation for over 2 years. Okay, so there's one allegation. It's vague at first, and then it grows and grows and grows and grows with manipulation by a therapist and by investigators. But for 2 years, he's the only allegation. Aaron Fisher was 5 years old the last time Jerry Sandusky coached a football game, okay? He has zero knowledge, memory of Jerry Sandusky being a Penn State football coach. He thinks Jerry Sandusky is a goofy guy who runs a charity for at-risk kids and who is the unpaid assistant football coach at his high school. Okay, that's what Jerry Sandusky is to Aaron Fisher. That is not a god. That is a guy who doesn't even have a nice car, right? Okay, and that's all the kids that age care about. Is what kind of car do you drive? Right. This is not somebody who would be so intimidating that Aaron Fisher would go, sure, you want me to suck your dick? Sure, I'll suck your dick. How many times do you want me to do it? Oh, I'll do it 100 times.
Which is what he accused him of.
Eventually at trial.
Yes.
Eventually at trial, the story goes from basically nothing to 100 times. 100
blowjobs.
100 times.
Yeah.
None of those times, by the way, does he ever mention the incredibly important distinguishing characteristic.
Wait for this.
That I now know, which I did not know until last year, because we have Jerry Sandusky's medical records. Jerry Sandusky effectively has no testicles. Okay? Virtually no testicles. Yet nobody mentions this, including the guy, Aaron Fisher, who allegedly got up at close and personal to those testicles 100 times. He never mentions this. Now, and nor does anybody else. Nobody else mentions this either. Now, as a teenage boy, you're very much aware of your own genitalia, what yours looks like, and other guys looks like, and this is worth millions of dollars.
Now, how do you know that Jerry Sandusky has effectively no testicles?
Because we have multiple medical records that indicate this from the time period where Aaron Fisher is making these allegations, and amazingly, these but if you know the people involved, it's not that amazing. Because I know the people involved, and this just didn't shock me at all. But amazingly, this never makes it into the trial, and here's what happens. So the firestorm happens. This is crazy. They're all shocked. Dottie Sandusky, his wife, who I have gotten to know exceedingly well, and people need to understand, she needs to be an accomplice in this case, okay? She can't just be looking the other way. Two of the key accusers put her at the scene of the crime. So she has to be an accomplice. Not just that's really important. She can't just be, I'm standing by my man for no apparent reason and staying in state college for no apparent reason where my life is hell when I can move to anywhere else in the world.
You mean they had to make her an accomplice?
Well, no. In other words, if you believe this story to be true,
yes.
If you believe Jerry is guilty,
then she has to be an accomplice.
She has to be an accomplice.
Exactly.
Okay?
Right.
Well, I've gotten to know Dottie exceedingly well. We don't even get along, but she's the church lady. Okay, this is the church lady come to life. This is a woman who has hung up on me on multiple occasions because I curse. Okay. And yet the world thinks that she's upstairs baking cookies while a boy is screaming while getting ass fucked by Jerry in a basement where you can hear everything that happens. Matt Lauer went down there and was like, "Are you kidding me? This is the basement this is the den of hell? What?"
He went down there?
Oh, yeah.
Matt Lauer was there?
Yeah.
And was like, what?
What? It's on television. It was on,
Yeah.
even Matt, he, of course, couldn't express extreme doubt on television. But
this is like 5 or 6 years ago, though.
Yeah, this was in 2014 when Dottie and I do an interview with Matt Lauer from her home.
Right.
And everyone's like, what? This is the famous dungeon? If you go to framingpaterno.com, I did a whole video from the basement of doom, just showing the absurdity of this whole thing. We have audio. We have this basement of doom, this room where one of the key accusers, number 9, Sebastian Payton is his name, is claiming to be ass raped, screaming by Jerry Sandusky while Dottie's upstairs. We have audio taken by an NCIS agent who believes Jerry to be innocent because he investigated the case for the federal government. Because he was. I'll get to that. He was investigating Graham Spaniner's national security clearance because after he'd been fired from Penn State, it needed to be renewed, and he renewed it because he investigated the whole thing and realized this is all bullshit. And then his name is John Snedden. He recorded audio on his phone. He's in the bedroom in the basement. He's recording a conversation he's having with Dottie, who's in the kitchen, like you and I are talking right now, and you can hear everything. So, the idea that this was somehow, and this, by the way, this victim claimed that he thought that the room might have been soundproof, and that's why that people didn't respond to his screams. There couldn't have been a less soundproof room in the history of construction. But the point is, all right. So the point of all this is that Aaron. No one mentions this. Aaron's story is ridiculous on its face, and he's the whole key to the case. Because he's the one allegation. If you have a story like this, you always have to go back to what's the first allegation, because every allegation after that could just be a copycat. No one wants to accept that, but that's certainly possible, especially when there's big money involved. So what is the nature of Aaron's allegation? And I even have an interview, again, people can see it for framingpaterno.com, with a guy who testified at trial, but according to him, didn't get asked any of the right questions and didn't, again, because Joe Amendola was so overwhelmed, he only met with him once for 15 minutes. He puts him on the stand, doesn't ask him any of the right questions. This is with Aaron Fisher's neighbor, who by chance happened to witness the first time Aaron makes his allegation, quote unquote allegation, against Jerry to his mother. He's there. They're living in welfare housing in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. This is a dirt town. This is the key to the whole case. Lock Haven is the epicenter of the whole case. As it turns out, 5 of the 36 guys are from Lock Haven. They ended up making over $35 million total, which, by the way, is probably by far more than the gross domestic product of Lock Haven, Pennsylvania in a year. So these 5 guys, all of whom are connected in some way, in my belief is, and I actually take responsibility for this. I think I'm actually responsible for a couple of these guys, because what has happened is, in my investigation, I have convinced Lock Haven that Aaron is full of shit. And in the course of convincing Lock Haven that Aaron is full of shit, a couple other guys who knew Jerry thought, well, if Aaron got away with it, I can get away with it. So they make late claims years after this story. They're making claims into 2016 and 17 and getting millions of dollars. Millions. So Aaron, we have this interview with Josh Fravel, who witnesses the whole thing. And he says Aaron said nothing that was remotely sexual. He was trying to get out of Jerry babysitting him that night. His mom didn't want to get him to get out of it because she was a partier who wanted to go drinking. She had scheduled her drinking night for that night, and Jerry was going to take care of Aaron. It's important to point out, Aaron is almost 15 years old at this point. He's having sex with lots of girls by his own admission and the admission of all of his buddies, or at least claiming to have sex with lots of girls, and there's evidence that he did based upon my conversations with people in his sphere. But so he's trying, in my opinion, he's like, I don't want to hang out with Jerry. I want to go find some girls. It's Saturday night. My mom won't let me do that, so I'm going to play the he makes me feel uncomfortable card. And Josh is witnessing this whole thing. And Dawn, his mom's name, and Dawn is a piece of work. I mean, Dawn is a welfare queen on steroids. So she takes Aaron inside, and a short time later comes out, and while smoking, I believe it was her Marlboro Lights, she tells Josh, quote, first thing she says, I'm going to own that motherfucker's house. That's what she says to the neighbor. That's the first thing she says. Now, they don't go to the police. No. They go to the high school where Jerry is this unpaid assistant coach. Now, if Aaron has said something that is horrendous, why are you not going to police?
Exactly.
You're going to the high school,
right?
Because you want money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you go to the high school,
right?
And
right.
Now the high school has taken a lot of grief because their initial reaction to this is, "You sure?" And by the way, it's important to point out, Aaron's not saying Jerry forced me to give him oral sex. Aaron is saying, he makes me feel uncomfortable. He touches me over my jeans or something. And Jerry is a very touchy-feely guy.
Okay.
Right?
Well, it's probably a big part of this.
No, it's a huge part of it.
Okay. I didn't know that.
He's very
affectionate.
There are people that are like that.
Yeah.
And I believe that the only thing that all these accusers said that is true is that for some reason Jerry, while driving, would put his hand on these guys' knee.
I do that all the time.
Okay. Well, I don't know why he did it, but that's the only thing I believe is 100% true. Jerry clearly did that because it's the only thing that every single one of them says.
Okay.
And so anyway, Aaron tells the school some sort of vague thing, and they basically say, "You sure you want to do this?" And in retrospect, when everyone thinks Jerry's a pedophile, this sounds like it's part of the cover-up. Everyone's trying to cover for Jerry. When in reality, they know Jerry, and they're like, this doesn't sound real. Now, I have gone to that high school, and the guy who was Jerry's head football coach is now the principal there, although I think he may have just retired. And he was the person who was the assistant principal at the time and the football coach. And I went in there unannounced a couple of years ago because I was investigating the case. Because I just couldn't. I said, "All right, you know what? I'm gonna talk to this guy because I want to know what he thinks." And so I somehow got into his office, and he even brought in an assistant because he wanted someone to witness this. And I looked him in the eye and I said, "Jerry is innocent. I think you know he's innocent." And he didn't say that, but I knew he knew that Jerry was innocent. And he says to me, I'm retiring in 3 years. I can write a book worth $1 million.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. And so now everyone in this case is a coward. And I expected him to be a coward. And I have no sense at all that he's writing a book. In fact, I tried to track him down recently, and I think his cell phone number has changed. Which, by the way, I might be the reason why he changed his cell phone because he knew I was gonna follow up on this.
Okay.
Because it was a real no holds barred, heart to heart. Look, dude, this thing is all wrong, and he didn't object. I mean, that's the important point. In some situations, the absence of evidence is really important. If I'm wrong, that guy's going to tell me, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. I was there. Aaron got abused. Get the fuck out of my office. There was zero of that. Okay?
Wow.
Zero.
No resistance.
Zero resistance. Zero.
Wow.
Zero resistance.
Huh.
So as I get into the Aaron Fisher story, I'm seeing a very, very different narrative, and I have on record, and I think this is the right number now, I have on record, in audio or video or Facebook messaging, I have 13 people who have said to me, and these are people who are very close to Aaron. These are relatives, including 2 aunts of his by marriage, but they're close aunts, buddies of his during the time of the allegations, his neighbors, his girlfriends, 2 women who sponsored a rally on his behalf when his book came out. All 13 of these people say, parents of friends of his at the time of the allegations, 13 people who say, this is not true. Aaron was not abused by Jerry Sandusky. And now people might think that's not that significant. This is not a normal case. This is a case where the whole world is saying that this happened.
That's right.
This happened. All right, so this is a huge fabric of the community that this happened. And yet despite that and having no self-interest, zero self-interest, people are coming to me proactively and saying, this didn't happen.
And what they're saying in our culture at that moment is evil.
Right. Yeah. So there's no incentive.
There's no incentive.
There's zero incentive. And they've already been this is despite being brainwashed by the entire media industrial complex that Aaron's a hero.
Yep.
I mean, Aaron's been on 2020 and he's written a book, and he wrote the book with his therapist and his mom, which is awfully weird. I have done a press conference.
His therapist and his mom were the co-authors.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, but I urge anyone. It's called Silent No More. I have actually held a press conference outside of one of Jerry's appeal hearings. I did this in I think it was, I forget what it was 2015 or 2016, and it's the videos at framingpaterno.com. It's very fiery. You think I'm fiery now. I mean, I went bananas, basically screaming at the news media to please revisit this case. And I actually had copies of Aaron's book. Now imagine this. This is how upside down this case is. I think the greatest evidence that Jerry Sandusky is innocent might be Aaron Fisher's book, which no one bothered to read. So because by that point, by the time his book comes out, everyone's already accepted that this is true. Paterno's fired and dead.
Sure.
Sandusky's been convicted.
Done.
Louis Freeh has done his thing. NCAA has done his thing.
And we all feel better. We're good.
And it's all based on Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay? So then Aaron's book comes out. Even I didn't read it because I always presumed, this goes back to my credibility, I presumed Aaron has to be the most credible of all the accusers because he was first, because he did a book, he did an interview. There were things about the interview I found very weird, but I was not skeptical of Aaron until I started talking to people who knew him. And then I read the book and I'm like, holy shit. How did I not read this book sooner? Because this book is a joke. It is a joke. If you know anything about the case, it is literally hilarious how absurd the book is. And there are tidbits in there that make you go, wait a minute, hold on. And of course, I'm probably one of the few, if only, people that can put all these pieces together. Like, I'll give you a quick example of how I think this whole thing really happened. This is going to get a little complex, but bear with me. So in the book, there is a scene where the therapist is upset because he's going to Aaron's house and finding out that there's a new detective on the case who is setting up a surveillance phone call between Aaron Fisher and Jerry Sandusky. Okay, now this is a normal thing to do. They're trying to get Aaron to get Jerry to confess, right? Okay, because at this point, they got nothing. They got no evidence. Yeah. And the therapist is upset because he doesn't think that Aaron is ready, which is weird. Okay, because I mean he's been treating Aaron for quite a while here, and Aaron's the first time Aaron ever says anything about sex is to the therapist in the answer to a yes or no question.
Oh, really?
Yes or no question. He asks him, did Jerry ever force you to give him oral sex or something to that?
Right.
And Aaron eventually says yes. And so that's all we've got. So he's upset that there's this new detective that he doesn't know who's on the case. That detective's name is Anthony Sassano. Now, Anthony Sassano ends up being the lead detective on this whole thing going forward, and he's gotten a huge amount of credit for this whole case. He's like the hero, all right? Well, interestingly, Anthony Sassano has never done a sex crimes case. He's a narcotics agent. Now, that at first ought to make you go, but here's what really makes you go, okay? So in my investigation of Aaron Fisher, I learned that Aaron Fisher's uncle, his mom's brother, DJ Fisher, had been involved in a case called the Dr. Barry Bender case. This was several years before the Sandusky case. He was a doctor who gave drugs in exchange for sex with boys. DJ was one of those boys, Aaron's uncle. Now, Aaron is close to DJ. Okay, now follow me here. So in the course of this situation, I have evidence that Dawn, his mom, is the one that presented DJ to the police. She has told people this, that she was the reason why DJ ended up going to the police on the Dr. Barry Bender case. Guess who the detective on the Dr. Barry Bender case was? Anthony Sassano. So here's what really happens, in my view.
Okay.
So Dawn has this experience with Sassano and her brother going after this Dr. Barry Bender on a sex crime situation, and she's getting nowhere with this allegation against Jerry Sandusky, which she's hoping is going to turn into money. So what does she do? Well, she still has Anthony Sassano's contact information because she had this experience with him with Bender. Sassano trusts her because she provided him with a key witness, and bingo, bango, bongo, Anthony Sassano is now the new lead detective on the Sandusky case.
Oh, boy.
Who thinks he knows sex crimes when he's just a narcotics agent. And so there's instant you see where I'm going with this? There's instant credibility here, and there's also a roadmap. Dawn, the mom, has a roadmap for how to get this done.
Yep.
She's looking, she doesn't care that, I mean, people think I'm going to be, I'm too cynical. I have evidence to back this up. She doesn't care really whether or not Aaron has been abused. She's looking for the payday.
Yeah.
And it's not just
his house, she said.
It's not just I'm going to own this motherfucker's house. So think about this from the mom's perspective. If Jerry is guilty, she is the worst mom in the history of the world.
True.
Because no, it's worse than you know.
Okay.
Because Aaron's stepdad, a guy by the name of DJ Daniels,
Oh, boy.
is in jail right now
Oh, boy.
for sex abuse against his own children.
Oh, boy.
So which he admitted to. Now,
He admitted to.
Yeah, but now there's no evidence he abused Aaron. He apparently abused one of his daughters. But so she brings DJ Daniels into the house with Aaron, who's a sex crimes perpetrator. She is aware of how this happens because of her brother getting abused by Dr. Bender, and yet for 3 years she's feeding her son to Jerry Sandusky. By the way, even after the first allegation, she's still using Jerry as a babysitter.
Oh, no.
But get this. So this mom, she's the worst mom in the world. You would have to be a sociopath to not have at least some guilt about what you have done here, right? You have put yourself. You should have known better. My God, I went through it with DJ with Daniels. I went through it with my brother, and then oh my gosh, I fed Aaron to Jerry for 3 years before I figured this out, what was going on, because the neighbor told me something. Yet this woman not only takes Aaron's money and buys the house that she told the neighbor she was going to buy that where her dogs could roam, she buys at least 3, I believe 4 luxury vehicles, including a Porsche, a BMW, a Mercedes. I think the 4th was a Cadillac Escalade. What mom with a sense of guilt uses her son's money that was gotten for the sex abuse that she facilitated to purchase luxury vehicles? I mean, that only happens if you know there wasn't any actual sexual abuse and you don't have guilt. We have a Facebook posting from her saying, now she's a crazy woman and she drinks a lot, so you never know, what has she said that, well, sober and what not. But she has said to Facebook to her friends, quote, "We earned this money."
Oh, boy.
That's a quote.
Oh, boy.
We earn this money. Now, she, of course, knows about what I've done quite a bit. She's never agreed to speak to me. I've been to her house and took pictures of the luxury vehicles. But she at one point agreed to have Aaron take a lie detector test. And I'm like, this is fantastic. Great. I'll pay for it, and I'll even pay him if he passes. And then suddenly, the very next day, she comes back and says, no, Aaron's not going to do it. Which, of course, means she went to Aaron, and Aaron, decided he wasn't going to do it. And then Aaron, this sex abuse victim, who's now an adult, He has threatened me with death. He was going to run me over with a truck.
Oh, wow.
With his truck.
Wow.
We believe that he has vandalized the vehicle of the neighbor who did the interview with me. We have photographic evidence to support that.
Oh my God.
The neighbor is certain of it. He has made numerous threats against me, refused to speak to me, and at one point, his now wife, then fiance, posted a photograph on Facebook of her laying in a bed draped in huge dollar bills. Now, that's open to interpretation, right? Of course, but me and my supporters immediately said, "What the hell is this? You know, is this the victim? Is this your victim money?" Aaron decides to then take a photograph with him also draped with his shirt basically off, draped in dollar bills in the same bed, giving the camera the middle finger. Now, this is your innocent, to the media, this is your
victim.
Your innocent victim with a halo over his head.
Yeah.
And here he is giving the middle finger, draped in money, a quarter naked, in a bed, which I interpreted to be directed at me. I mean, this was, if you know the timing of all this, it's clear that he's responding to me. He's giving me the finger, and here, look at all the money I'm draped in my bed.
Right.
This is not. I mean, now I realize that the people who believe that all allegations are true will tell you, you can't interpret the reaction of a.
And there is no perfect victim. They'll say, you know, they make mistakes.
But something. Okay,
this is a little bit more than that. This is a lot more than that. This is a whole lot more than that.
At a certain point.
This is a mountain more than that.
At a certain point, you got to go, well, where's the fucking evidence?
Right.
I mean, I get that you might not react perfectly, and I get, of course, everything's always Jerry's fault. I mean, everything is always Jerry's fault because he abused them, so therefore any action that they take is because he fucked them up.
Sure.
Well, wait a minute. We got to go back to the beginning
Right.
and determine, was there any actual abuse?
Right.
And there should be mountains of evidence here. There should be OJ-like evidence. And there's nothing. And Aaron is the the case is built on two pillars. Aaron Fisher and Mike McQuarrie, who I'm sure we're going to get to, the one witness and the one accuser. Though we were told when the story broke that these two pillars were made of steel, they're not made of steel. They're made of sand. They disintegrate among even the slightest bit of scrutiny. And I'm just one guy with no resources. And maybe, you know, forget about the actual facts, which I could talk about for 8 hours, but maybe from a gut level, what I always go back to, why I know I'm right, is that, thank God for Facebook. I mean, Facebook has basically proven this case, except no one knows it. I have photographs on my phone right now. I could show you dozens of photographs that you're going, no way. There's just no way. There's no way. These guys have all posted. They're all huge Penn State fans. There's all sorts of things that they've posted that make no sense if they are Jerry Sandusky victims.
Oh, right.
But here's the main thing. Here's the main thing. I have gotten, and having gone on the Today Show twice, and having this website, and a lot of my posts go viral in Lock Haven, where there's the epicenter of this case. So everyone in Lock Haven knows who I am.
Yeah. I
have gotten not one credible person to come forward, and I get hundreds. Not one credible person in Lock Haven has come forward and said, or anywhere else, and said, John, you got this wrong. Let me tell you. I was there, or I'm the parent of a victim, or I'm the victim myself. Let me tell you about my experience. I had one mom express, hey, John, I think you got this wrong. I said, can I talk to you? This was a mom of, not a trial victim, but was someone who was a settlement victim. I said, I'm happy to talk to you. Because at this point, I'm still like, please prove to me that Jerry is guilty.
Yeah.
We spoke for like 2.5 hours on the phone. By the end of the conversation, she's like, I think you're right. Jerry's innocent. Because she had misinterpreted everything. Well, then she disappears. Why? Because her son got like $6 million, and I've been told from other sources that he ends up like paying for all sorts of cars and trips, and so these guys
$6 million.
So these are people that are hugely rich, and no one wants to upset the apple cart.
Sure.
So my point is, in this case, with the toxic nature of it, the nuclear bomb nature of it, why am I getting any messages from anybody saying this isn't real?
Right.
And why am I getting zero credible messages from people saying, you got this wrong?
Right.
That's not possible.
Right.
That's not possible. In any case, it's not possible, but in this one particularly, because of the media environment, the way I describe this is a nuclear bomb went off on this case, okay? And it obliterated the ground. How am I able to get anything to grow on that ground so quickly afterwards? In other words, if I was trying to manipulate this into, I want to try to grow the seeds of innocence, nothing would grow in this ground unless it was based on truth. It would be impossible because that's not the way humanity works. So anyway, I don't know where you want to go next, but there's.
I know I know, which is this. You said this before we started the mic, before we started recording. I think you said, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
In my career.
In your career, yeah.
My mother was killed in a car accident in 1994. That was probably the worst thing that's happened.
Or maybe you said you said in recent years it's the worst.
I know, definitely in my career and certainly in my life in recent years. And it's not close. I mean, this has been horrendous. I've aged more in the last 7 years than I did in the previous 20. My career has been damaged greatly by this. I'm amazed that Mediaite allows me to write for them as a senior columnist, and I'm doing some other things as far as I'm starting a brand new podcast that's about Donald Trump, which is going to be internationally distributed. So there's some semblance of a comeback, I guess. But the reality is, I have lost money. I have no ability to. I can't even tell you how many times on Twitter I'll confront somebody, and all they have to do, it's the ultimate mic drop. This is the guy that thinks Jerry Sandusky is innocent.
Yeah, there you go.
You're
done.
I'm done.
You're done.
Because and I'm talking about major media people.
Sure.
So my ability to get the word about anything else out about things that have nothing to do with this is greatly curtailed because. Yeah. Oh, that's the Jerry Sandusky is innocent guy. Matt Lauer declared my career over very nicely on the Today Show. It's ironic that he ends up having his career end because of sex abuse allegations,
exactly.
which, by the way, I don't believe are true.
Right.
I believe
agree.
Matt Lauer got totally railroaded, and I'm not a fan of his, although I've done 3 high-profile interviews.
Totally agree on all that.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but by the way, to be clear, like, just so people know, I do believe Larry Nassar is absolutely guilty.
Sure seems that way.
100% guilty. But guess what? Pornography was found.
There you go.
He confessed.
There you go.
Which Jerry never did.
Right.
So, by the way, right there.
Oh, yeah.
Right there, you've got 9, I'm guessing, but this is an educated guess, 90% of these cases are solved by pornography and confessions. 90%.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, Jerry, no pornography, no confession, no payoffs, no non-disclosure agreements. By the way, Nassar's wife left him immediately. Dottie Sandusky hasn't even thought about leaving Jerry Sandusky, even though it would be in hugely her self-interest to at least leave State College. I mean, why?
She still lives there?
She still lives at State College in the same house.
Oh, no.
So that would only happen if you had no consciousness of guilt.
Right.
There's zero consciousness of guilt.
Wow.
Her life would be so much easier.
Of course.
If
she were actually the wife of that man they believe he is,
she would have left.
There's no way she could stay in that town.
No way.
No way.
There's nothing. There's nothing. And by the way, I'll break. I mean, to me, this is news. I mean, I haven't really talked about this publicly. I have very, 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 very good reason to believe that Graham Spanier, the president of Penn State, who was fired and was eventually convicted of a misdemeanor, although he's appealing, Tim Curley and Gary Schultz, the 3 administrators that were alleged to be in the cover-up there. I am morally certain that 2 of those 3 know Jerry to be innocent.
Oh, my.
And I believe, I've never had this conversation, but I have talked to people who have had conversations with Tim. I believe that Tim believes that Jerry is innocent,
oh my God.
I have done
an interview with one of the three of those. I can't disclose right now. I've done a 90-minute interview with one of those three where they detail exactly why they know that Jerry is innocent. I have not yet released it yet. I will later this year. I have to wait for some legal stuff to happen before they'll let me release it. But this interview, to me, and I've done some really high-profile interviews. The interview I did with one of those administrators is, in my opinion, the best interview I've ever done. For a number of reasons. One, it won't make news because the media doesn't want it to make news. But in a rational world, having one of the three people convicted of helping Jerry Sandusky in a cover-up say, Jerry is innocent, and I know Jerry's innocent, and here's why, in a very compelling way, should be massive news, because they have no incentive at all. I mean, they've already been convicted. They're going to get ridiculed, but this person just wanted the record to be out there. And part of why this person knows that Jerry is innocent is because they were at the epicenter of the whole thing, and they know that the date of the key episode is wrong. Still to this day is totally wrong.
Which is what?
The Mike McQueary episode, which is...
He was the assistant coach?
He was a graduate assistant at the time. And this is the case...
He was famous at the time, along with... He was the other sort of well-known figure in this case,
Well, he became, for the media...
He's the only other name I remember from this, yeah.
To the media, when the story broke, he was the whole case.
Yeah.
Because he was connected to Paterno. He was a graduate assistant well, I hesitate to use the year because the year has been wrong, but the media originally reported when this story broke, this is how bad the reporting on this has been. When the story first broke, the story was that on March 1st, 2002, Mike McQueary witnessed Jerry Sandusky raping or whatever you want to call it, a young boy in a Penn State shower. He then tells Joe Paterno about it, and Joe Paterno basically passes along, does nothing, and Penn State covers it up. That's the basic narrative of what occurred. Well, the first time in this case that my hair started to stand on end, like holy shit, was something that should have made massive news and was basically oh, by the way. Several months after Paterno dies, but before, no, it was several months, it was just after Paterno died, and but before Jerry's arrest, the prosecution makes a very odd announcement, very quiet. Under further review, that date that destroyed Joe Paterno's career and life and was the source of all that massive publicity, it wasn't March. It wasn't 2002.
What?
It was February 9th of 2001. and I'm like, whoa.
Oh, God.
We're gonna put all of this on an eyewitness account that is 10 years old, and where the guy got the date, the month, and the year wrong. And he didn't just get the date, month, and the year wrong. Remember what happens between February 9th, 2001 and March 1st, 2002. You got 9/11 in between there. So you can't remember if this happened before 9/11 or after 9/11?
Oh, God, the greatest historical marker in the modern age.
Exactly. How is that possible?
Right.
No, and I'm, again, this goes back to why I'm pretty perfectly suited for this case. Football coaches, especially college football coaches, their whole life is by what happened. They mark everything by the year because the football season starts in September and hopefully ends on January 1st, back in that era. So the year is everything to them. Their whole life, it's not like...
It's all about seasons. It's all about seasons.
It's not like basketball where, wait a minute, that was the 2013/14 season. No. It's all within a calendar year.
Yeah.
So football coaches are exceeding, it's their life. You remember everything by what happened. What bowl game did we go to?
Sure.
So just from a memory standpoint, I immediately thought, okay, my BS detector is now really on high because the story never made any sense to me. And how is it that McQueary could get this that wrong? Now, But how they determine the second date is key. They determine the second date almost entirely because of two things. One, Jerry Sandusky told them that March 1st, 2002 couldn't be right because he knew the boy that was there with him that night, and he knew that by March 1st, 2002, that wasn't logistically possible. He didn't know what the date was, but he's like, there's no way. Of course, they didn't necessarily believe Jerry because he's the accused. Well, then they get a batch of emails from Gary Schultz, one of the three administrators who has since been convicted. He finds his old emails and voluntarily gives them up. Says, hey, look, I found these emails. This is interesting. And they look at it and they go, oh, Joe Paterno met with Mike McQuarrie on February 10th of 2001. That means, obviously, it's impossible that the date was March 1st, 2002. Well, this is where things get a little complex, but it's incredibly important.
Okay.
Because we don't even have to talk about sex abuse here to prove what bullshit this whole case is. So, here's what happens. So now we have February 10th, 2002 is the date of the Paterno meeting, which I have an email from Sue Paterno, who was there that day, that blows apart the whole narrative there. She says it happened for 3 minutes, ironically, as Joe was getting out of the shower to go to an event that night, and she doesn't believe there was any time whatsoever for Mike to be talking about a sexual assault. This was a 3-minute conversation. I'll explain what I think happened in that conversation as we move along. So the prosecution, they got a problem. One, they have changed the date. So when did this happen? Well, we already know that Mike said this happened on a Friday and it happened in this basic time of year, although Mike had originally said in his grand jury testimony, the campus was totally quiet, this was spring break, he thought, and that March 1st, 2002 was the first Friday of spring break. And they used that in the grand jury as bum, bum, bum. You know, Jerry knows that the campus is going to be quiet, and he's going to use the privacy of the locker room to rape this boy and get away with it. Of course, no one ever wants to talk about that. Why is Jerry going to semi-public / private places to engage in sex?
In a shower.
Why not his home?
Yeah.
There's not one allegation. If Jerry's thing was to rape boys in a shower, he's had boys at his home hundreds of times.
Sure.
Not one allegation. Not one, anywhere. And I've seen all the documents in the settlements. Not one allegation. Jerry took me to the shower in his home and raped me. Not one. Why? Because that Jerry, in his mind, would know that doing it at home was inappropriate, but doing it in what he thought of as a public place would not be as inappropriate. Now, I don't think it's a smart move. It's dumb. It's concerning. I get why Mike McQuarrie would, if he walked in on that, would be like, what the fuck is this? I get all that. But you have to remember, Jerry Sandusky is from a different generation. He grew up in a rec home where nudity was everywhere. This is the first allegation against him, which doesn't come up until way later, is 1998, where he took a shower. The second one is, I believe, in very late 2000. This is a different world. This is Happy Valley, Pennsylvania, before the Catholic Church scandal, before 9/11. People need to understand culturally, this is different. This is Mayberry. Okay,
yes.
Think Mayberry.
Yes.
So
I've been there.
So the idea of, it might seem incredibly odd in 2019, but it's not that odd for a guy like Jerry to take a shower with a boy he thought of as his son, who, by the way, was not 10 years old, was almost 14 years old, and was 2.5 years away from winning a varsity letter on his high school football team. So this was not a little boy.
Right.
Okay. So, all right. So we go back. So the prosecution has this issue. What do we do? If we know that the meeting happened on February 10th, well, that means that this had to happen the night of February 9th. Because if it didn't happen the night of February 9th, there's no urgency on the part of Mike McQuarrie to tell Joe Paterno about it. And if there's no urgency, he didn't see a rape, right? You follow me? So they decide, we have a new date. It's February 9th of 2001. Now this is where I deserve the blame.
Okay.
I fucked up. I did not trust my instincts, and it's probably the greatest regret from a factual standpoint that I've had in this whole deal. Because when I interviewed Jerry, again, I'm presuming Jerry is guilty. So everything he's saying, I'm giving very little weight to, except when it comes to the Paterno angle, because there's no, to me, he has zero incentive to be exonerating Joe Paterno, because Joe Paterno is the reason he got arrested. People didn't understand that.
Right.
So anyway, Jerry, I can tell in my bones, I know he doesn't believe February 9th is possible. He knew 2002 was not possible, but I'm sitting between a screen and him, and I'm like, this guy does not believe February 9th. There's just no way he believes it. But he doesn't know what the real date is because he hasn't put it all together. And I can tell he's been trying, but he can't. Well, I should have thrown everything at that moment into what's up with February 9th. And I didn't. I did a very cursory investigation about February 9th because he had told me that, and he didn't give me the name, but I figured it out myself, and then he later confirmed it. He told me that the boy he was with that night, the almost 14-year-old, guy by the name of Alan Myers, I would later learn on my own, and Jerry confirmed this, that he knew Alan was off school the day that this happened, and that he would never have taken Alan out of school. So therefore, Alan must not have had school that day. So I contacted Alan's school. I said, can someone find me an old calendar from 2001? Did you guys have school on February 9th? And they told me, yes, we did. And I didn't know what to make of that, because I thought, is it possible Jerry's giving me a bullshit story? Is it possible he doesn't remember? He's been in solitary confinement. Maybe he's groggy. Maybe his memory is bad. And I'm stupidly thinking, there's no way the prosecution has blown this date twice. Because again, I'm a conservative who believes in the prosecution.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, there's no way they blew this twice.
Right.
No way.
Right.
And so I basically dropped the February 9th thing. It's still in the back of my mind, but I'm like, there's just no way. It's got to be February 9th, right? We know he met with Joe Paterno on the 10th. It makes sense that it's the 9th, even though it's not spring break. But then some other things start to come to light. One of which is that on February 9th, on campus, right across the street from where this happened, is a massive rock concert. Okay, so massive. Sold out, huge deal. Also on February 9th, in the very building where the shower is, there is a hockey game taking place.
Jesus Christ.
It starts at 9:15, which is exactly the same time when this event supposedly takes place.
Oh my!
So there is no possible way that Mike would have thought this happened on a night where campus was quiet. I mean, you literally couldn't find a night where there was more going on where he was that night. There's also another important thing, as your memory works. On February 7th of that year is National Signing Day for college recruits. He's a graduate assistant. That's his whole existence.
That's right.
Is recruiting high school kids to go to Penn State. So if this really happened on February 9th, he would have pegged that date. Oh my gosh, it was so busy. I was so busy. February 7th was National Signing Day. It happened 2 days later. I don't even know why I was going over to the last building.
Right.
I mean, but that would have been the way you would have remembered it.
Yeah.
Instead, no mention of that. Nothing. And again, he gets it wrong. So what's the real date? So now I'm like, okay, I got to reinvestigate this. And this goes to where Jerry is just so useless. I mean, in so many ways. I mean, he's the worst defendant. Innocent people are the worst defendants because they think the system's all going to take care of it. He thought Jesus would take care of it. Dottie thought Jesus would take care of it. I blame Jesus for more of this than almost anything because they did so many stupid things because they thought Jesus was going to.
They're very Christian people.
Very Christian.
Yeah.
So Jesus was going to take care of it. Well,
he sure did. He sure did.
Well, as I've told them and their friends have told them, maybe Jesus brought you John Ziegler, and maybe you should have listened to John Ziegler because they don't listen to me, except for very rare circumstances. So anyway, long story short, I go back and I'm like, Jerry, you connect this shower event with you losing out on the Virginia head coaching job, which, by the way, to me, that blows up the whole cover-up, because the fact that Jerry Sandusky was a finalist for the head coaching job at the University of Virginia is impossible if Penn State knew he was a pedophile, because Penn State and Virginia were tied at the hip. They had numerous coaches that had coached together. Joe Paterno's son, was a graduate assistant at the University of Virginia. He's married to a Virginia alum. There is no fucking way, if there was a hint of suspicion about Jerry Sandusky, that they were going to let Virginia hire him as their head coach. Jerry gets 4 interviews and a contract, and he's about to sign it. And then, this is one of the most amazing elements of this whole story that Paul Harvey would love. The only reason why Jerry loses out on the Virginia job is because the New York Jets lose their last 3 games of the 2000 season. Now, what you're saying, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? The head coach of the New York Jets was Al Groh. Al Groh thought they were going to the playoffs. Instead, they missed the playoffs. He loses the last 3 games of the year. He gets in a fight with a New York reporter. He thinks he's going to get fired. He's a Virginia alum. He calls Virginia and says, "Stop the presses. I want the job." He literally calls during Jerry's last interview. Jerry says he remembers it vividly that the weather changed once the guy who was interviewing him went out to take a phone call and comes in, and all of a sudden he can tell that something's not right. He leaves with the contract. The next day, Virginia hires Al Groh. Well, what's most amazing with the Paul Harvey aspect of this is, why do the Jets lose their last 3 games of the season? They lose the last 3 games of the season because their quarterback is Vinny Testaverde. Vinny Testaverde was the quarterback that Jerry Sandusky became famous for having his defense intercept 5 times in the 1986 Fiesta Bowl, winning the national championship for Penn State.
Oh, yeah.
So the whole story comes around full circle. Vinny Testaverde gets his ultimate revenge.
I watched that game, yeah.
Okay, so anyway, why is this important? So Jerry says, I don't know what date, but I remember it happened around the time of the Virginia head coaching situation and my book coming out. He wrote a book called Touched, oddly enough, with the prosecution bizarrely used as him confessing that he's a pedophile, yet he never has confessed, which is awfully weird. So anyway, I go back, and with the help of I have lots of people who support me on this case that are just normal, everyday people. Someone sends me a newspaper article from, I guess it would have been in the paper, December 31st of 2000. It's an article about an event that had occurred the day before, where Jerry is at a book signing in State College, Pennsylvania, learning on television that he had lost out on the Virginia head coaching job. So now we got a book signing and the Virginia head coaching job happening on December 30th of 2000. So I go, Jerry, I email him in prison. I said, Jerry, we've got this newspaper article. We got these 2 events happening together on that Saturday. Is this ringing any bells? And he goes, yeah. Now I think I'm putting this all together. I was in Washington, PA, which is on the other side of Pennsylvania, that Friday morning to do a book signing where I grew up. I was with Alan Myers, and I drove from Washington, Pennsylvania back to State College that night, and that night we took a shower. But it's important to point out, they didn't even know McQueary was there, which shows you what bullshit McQueary's story is, because McQueary tries to claim I made eye contact because he didn't stop it. Like, who doesn't stop a rape of a boy when you're 6'4" and 235 and young, and Jerry's old and naked, right?
Or not, yeah, either way. Yeah.
Jerry had no idea that McQueary was even there. McQueary just saw it through a window and a mirror, the smoky mirror in the shower, and that was it for 3 seconds, by his own admission. 3 seconds. And anyway, the point is that Jerry mentions to me, on the way I stopped for gas, and I called a friend of mine, my college roommate, who had a connection at the University of Virginia, because I knew he wanted an update on the Virginia head coaching job. I said, well, who's that? So he gives me the name. And I contact Dottie. I said, you have this guy's contact information? She says, yeah. And I called the guy up. He has no idea why I'm calling him. None, but he knows who I am because he's been following the case. He knows Jerry, or believes Jerry to be innocent because he's known him his whole life. He was a college fucking roommate. Okay, you're college roommates with somebody, you know whether or not they like young boys. And I say, can you take me back to the Virginia head coaching job situation? He goes, yeah, I remember it very well because I was really psyched for Jerry to get the job because I think his son went to Virginia or something like that. And anyway, long story short, he reiterates the exact story of getting a phone call from Jerry while he stopped for gas. He remembers it because he remembers joking with Jerry that Jerry was so stupid he couldn't figure out how to pump the gas while the University of Virginia was about to pay him $400,000 a year to coach football. And so we have as good a validation of Jerry's story as I could possibly get. So now we have a timeline. We have December 29th, Jerry drives from Washington with Alan Myers, stops to get gas, goes to State College. It's late that night. They decide after a long day of travel they're going to take a shower. They're playing games. Jerry calls it Polish soccer, whatever. Mike McQuarrie walks in, and I believe what happens is Mike McQuarrie is watching football that whole day because Penn State didn't make a bowl game that year. They sucked. Their season has been over for over a month. Normally, this is a very busy time of year. Right. But what's December 29th on campus? It's about as quiet as you're ever going to possibly get.
It's a cemetery. Yeah.
It's a cemetery. Yeah. December 29th is a Friday. It is a cemetery. Yeah. Penn State isn't in a bowl game. Mike has nothing going on. He's watching the Peach Bowl between LSU and Georgia Tech. That game ends at 8:37, I think it is, on that Friday night. He's been watching football all day. He decides, I'm going to go do something. He goes to the Lash locker room to get some tapes and some sneakers or something, and he just happens to hear someone taking a shower. I believe that Mike, being a very sexual person, which I'll explain later, I believe that Mike thinks that he is going to walk in because he hears slapping sounds. Yeah. He thinks he's going to walk in on an assistant coach fucking a girl. That's what he thinks. So in his mind, he's expecting something like that. He turns the corner, and I'm being generous because there are people who believe this is not logistically possible who have been to the actual location, which I have not. But he says that he looks in the mirror and sees the reflection of Jerry with the boy for, again, 2 or 3 seconds. Mm-hmm. Now, he's shocked because he's expecting to see a man and a woman having sex. Mm-hmm. And instead, he sees Jerry goofing around with a boy naked. That's disconcerting. I get it. Mm-hmm. Totally understand. Mm-hmm. But I believe that the date now is December 29th, 2000. Why is that important? That's incredibly important because now you have a 6-week gap between when Mike McQuarrie sees this and when he goes to go see Joe Paterno. Mm-hmm. That shows zero urgency.
Yep.
So why did Mike McQuarrie go to see Joe Paterno? We have an explanation. In fact, we have a couple explanations, but I believe the most easily understood is this. So what happens in those days before that February 10th meeting with Joe Paterno? On February 8th, Kenny Jackson leaves Penn State to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers, opening up the wide receivers coaching job at Penn State. Mike McQuarrie is a lowly graduate assistant, which means you're shit. You paid nothing. Yep. I don't think you get health insurance. Yep. He is desperate for a job. Yep. He wants that job. It's not a coincidence that Mike McQuarrie learns probably on February 9th that the job has opened up, and he goes to see Joe Paterno on February 10th. He's going to go see Joe Paterno to get FaceTime with Joe Paterno to see if he can get that job.
Oh, my.
That's a far more logical scenario, especially when you consider that Mike McQuarrie's own testimony is that when he calls Joe Paterno that morning on Saturday to see if he can come over, Joe Paterno allegedly says, if this is about a job, don't bother coming over. I don't have one for you. Now, that sounds like you're substantiating Mike's story. No. I have been in the Paterno kitchen at the same table where Mike and Joe allegedly, although I don't believe this happened, but according to Mike, had this conversation. There were a bunch of people there, including Sue Paterno, who was there that day of this fateful event. And I happened to mention, thinking it was totally irrelevant, I don't even know why I mentioned it, but I mentioned Mike's statement about Joe saying, if this is about a job, don't bother coming over. From the kitchen, Sue Paterno whips around and says, that never happened. And I never met Sue Paterno before, didn't know her at all. I've been told she has an amazing memory. She's there that day. I also know older couples well enough to know that if a woman's been married to a guy for over 50 years and she says he didn't say something, he didn't say something. All right. So what's going on? This is the way Mike's mind is working and the way his story is working.
Right.
He's covering for the fact that it was about a job, that's really what happened here. I also think that he may have been being defensive about why he hadn't reported this earlier. And why we know the timeline on this is really important, because in this interview that I did, we have proof that one of Mike's own friends, his testimony proves the 6-week gap. And the basis of this is, and I don't want to get too deeply into it, but here's the basics of it. Gary Schultz knows when he met with Mike McQueary's dad and this other witness by the name of Dr. John Dranoff. He knows that happened in late February. He can't pinpoint the exact day, but he's been able to narrow it down to a couple of days in late February. Dranoff's testimony is that he went to go see Gary Schultz to find out an update on Mike's report about Jerry Sandusky in late February of 2001. All right? He was asked, how long was it between the time Mike came to you to tell you about this and the time you had the meeting with Gary Schultz? He says, between 2 and 3 months.
My God.
Now that is Mike's own witness, effectively.
Oh my God.
Saying, so if you backtrack from late February, 2 months is late December, you got the perfect date. And Jerry Sandusky has now told me via email, yep, that was the date. And the administrator that I have interviewed has said, yep, that's the date. And that totally changes everything, because now Mike McQueary has no credibility. And people say, well, why did Mike do this? I believe that Mike McQueary got manipulated. I think Mike McQueary, here's what was going on. By the way, that wide receivers coaching job, Mike doesn't get the job.
Yeah, right.
Which disproves the whole cover-up, because the first thing that would happen in the cover-up is, congratulations, Mike. Why don't we keep this between us? You're the new wide receivers coach. Congratulations. Mike doesn't get the job, yet he gets it 3 years later when it opens up again. So it's the job he wanted, to be clear. I wasn't making this up that Mike wanted the wide receivers coaching job. He gets that job 3 years later when it reopens.
That's right.
So that's important, because it shows, one, no cover-up, and it, two, shows he desperately wanted that job. So there's no rationale for why Mike doesn't get that job if there's a cover-up. That makes no sense. You're going to let your only witness in a cover-up go without a job that happens to be open that he's qualified for? That's nonsensical.
Right.
So now that we have this 6-week time frame, we know that there was no urgency. And here's what really happened, in my view. Here's what really happens. So this investigation is languishing, and for 2 years with Aaron Fisher, they got nothing. And they're thinking about dropping the whole thing. There's multiple pieces of evidence that they were going to drop the whole thing. And all of a sudden they get a tip that somebody ought to talk to Mike McQueary, from a former Baltimore police officer who was a Penn State fan, who did a lot of activity on the Penn State message boards. And you might want to talk to Mike McQueary. It doesn't say Mike McQueary witnessed a rape. He says Mike McQueary may have seen a boy in a shower, which is all I think happened. He saw a boy in a shower. And so they get this tip. It's, by the way, it's sent to the wrong person. It's sent to the local DA, and this case was not a DA case because it was a conflict of interest, which was another part of the perfect storm here. The DA had some tangential relationship to the spouse of one of Jerry's foster kids or something, or maybe adopted kids. Anyway, so this is an attorney general's case. It gets passed on to the attorney general's office. Mike McQueary gets called by investigators. And they're desperate for information. What do you know? Well, according to Don Van Atta of ESPN, and I have a tape that you can find on YouTube of our conversation of him confirming this. Don Van Atta was investigating all this to do a feature in ESPN, the magazine, on Mike McQueary. And according to him, he has the phone record, or had the phone records to prove this, and had spoken to people who could verify this, that they were the people that Mike McQueary called. When Mike McQueary gets a call from his now ex-wife, which is interesting that he's no longer married, considering he's now a national hero and worth $10 million. His ex-wife, his then wife, who's I believe a doctor or some sort of physician, she calls Mike and says, hey, these investigators want to talk to you. According to Don Van Atta, Mike freaks out. Not because, as he later wrongly testified in a very similar fashion to, if this is about a job, I don't have one for you. I believe Mike is one of these liars who concocts stories naturally to cover up his lies. His story is, I was thrilled that they contacted me because I couldn't believe someone was finally contacting me about Sandusky. No. He thought they were contacting him because he had been sending pictures of his penis to a woman, not his wife, through a Penn State phone.
Oh, boy.
Which I have on my own phone. I have, which I'm not proud of. Imagine scrolling through your pictures and you have Mike McQuarrie's dick pic in your phone.
Oh, boy.
And so Don Van Atta said he was going to report all of this.
Oh, God.
And that McQuarrie was very concerned that this was about him when investigators come to him. So imagine you're Mike McQuarrie. You're just a football coach. You're not very bright. You're not thinking about how any of this is going to look in retrospect. Once people decide that there was a rape back in 2000 or 2001, whenever it was, and you get talked to, and you're like, thank God this is not about the dick pics. And they say to you, you didn't report this, but we're more than willing to look the other way on that if you can just help us here, because we believe Jerry's a pedophile. We got Aaron Fisher, this kid who says he's been abused. Wow. We're desperate for witnesses. We heard you saw something. Can you flesh this out for us? Now imagine you're Mike McQuarrie. Maybe for years you thought it was weird. I got no problem with that. I got no problem with you being weirded out by it. You're concerned by it. You weren't concerned enough about it to go to Joe Paterno for 6 weeks, but okay, but you've been at least, that was weird. And then all of a sudden investigators, with you being, shit in your pants, they tell you that Jerry's a pedophile, there's in this investigation, and we got this accuser that's been abused for years. Then all of a sudden you reinterpret what you think you remember from 10 years ago in a way that conforms to what they want. And then they take that and they manipulate it further. Because when they put it in the grand jury presentment, we have emails from Mike immediately telling the prosecutor, Janelle Eschbach, saying, this is not what I said. You're manipulating, and I'm paraphrasing, but you're manipulating what I said. And she acknowledges to him, look, some of this stuff might not be accurate, but we can't talk about it right now because, we got to let the media do their thing. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but these are the emails that we have from Mike McQuarrie. So you have a grain of a story that over 10 years, has not grown, but it then gets manipulated by investigators. He says something that's an exaggeration of what he saw, and then they take the exaggeration and then they put in the presentment anal intercourse. Now, Mike McQuarrie has never said he saw anal intercourse.
Right.
But
that's right.
But that gets put in there, and people's heads explode.
Oh, my God. He never even claimed that. That's right.
Well, in fact, as I've already referenced, Jerry Sandusky got acquitted on that count because McQuarrie never said it at trial. There's no evidence of it. And most importantly, most amazingly, no victim ever testifies in that episode.
But I'll tell you, John, that I thought it was a possibility, even though I was skeptical, that the slapping sound that Mike McQuarrie heard that day was ass fucking.
Sure.
Everyone did.
Sure.
And everyone and everyone still does.
Of course.
Right.
Except until you know the timeline, and then you also know who the victim was.
Yeah, I no longer think it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when you know who the victim is, it's the coup de grace for the whole case.
Okay.
Because we know who I figured out who Alan Myers is.
Okay.
And now imagine no one in the media wanted to comprehend the significance that the most famous case of alleged child molestation in the history of the country, if not the world,
oh my God,
if not the world, had no victim at trial. Now think about that right off the bat. And there was zero skepticism in the press about, where's the victim? Because this didn't happen 30 years ago. Okay, in a normal case, I can understand you can't find the victim. He moved away, or maybe it's long enough ago that he died. No. This was they thought 10 years later. 10 years later, from a boy that was supposed to be a small boy. McQuarrie claimed 10. He was, or 10 or 12. He was not. The prosecution throughout this case went head over heels to try to diminish the ages of all these accusers. They lied.
They always do.
They lied their asses off to avoid puberty.
Wow.
Anyway, so the point here is that we have Alan Myers allegedly at 10 years old. He's not really at 10 years old. He's almost 14 years old, and we know several things about what actually transpired there, which we didn't know at the time. So here's what happens with Alan Myers. After this occurs, There's this investigation. Penn State looks into it. They ask Jerry about it. Interestingly, Jerry, his first response is, I don't know what you're talking about, which at the time seems like deceit.
Mm-hmm.
Except when we now know about the 6-week lapse in time, it makes perfect fucking sense. Because Jerry's being asked about something that happened 2 or 3 months earlier. So of course your first response is, what are you talking about? Because Penn State thinks it just happened.
Right.
So they're saying, Jerry, we were told by Mike McQuarrie that this thing just happened. And Jerry's like, what? And Jerry comes back to them and says, actually, I think I know what you're talking about. Would you like to talk to the boy? Penn State, for some reason, and it's a tragic mistake in retrospect, decides there's so little to this, they're not even going to bother the boy. But Jerry calls the boy. Jerry calls Alan Myers. So Myers remembers that there's an issue, or a potential issue here, that someone has raised about their shower. Now, Myers isn't thrilled about talking to him about his shower with Penn State, but he agrees, okay, I'll talk to him. Penn State never calls. So in Alan Myers' mind, this is a done deal. Nothing ever happens about this for 10 years. Well, then these allegations against Jerry start to surface locally because of a local report by Sarah Ganem, who ends up winning the Pulitzer Prize, and she's a complete total fraud. She is a complete and total fraud. She's 23 years old. Imagine this, 23-year-old female cub reporter who never did anything before and has never done anything since, suddenly breaks the biggest scandal in the history of college sports. It's a miracle. She's a journalistic savant who must have lost her journalistic abilities because she's been hired by CNN. Now she has all the resources in the world. She hasn't done shit since then.
She won the Pulitzer?
Yeah, she won the Pulitzer because she was given information by the prosecution desperate for new victims.
My God.
That's what happened. She was used as a Craigslist ad for new victims, and she got a Pulitzer on it.
Oh my God.
So anyway, so anyway, the point here is, locally, this starts to become an issue. Nationally, it hasn't made any news because no one cares about Jerry Sandusky. But so it's been reported locally. There's this grand jury investigation. At that time, some of Jerry's supporters start writing letters to the editor in the local papers. One of the guys who writes a letter to the editor in 2 different local papers, which I have, is Alan Myers. Alan Myers writes a letter detailing his entire history with Jerry and that these accusers are not to be believed. Now, Alan Myers isn't just some kid. At this point, Alan Myers is a sergeant in the Marine Corps, and he's married, okay? So he's 23, 24 years old at the time of these letters, married, sergeant in the Marine Corps, saying, Jerry's the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
Oh, my God.
So then we fast forward a few months, and all hell breaks loose. Jerry's arrested, and Joe Paterno looks like he's about to get fired. On the day Joe Paterno is fired, Alan Myers comes in unannounced with his mom into the offices of Joe Amendola to say, I'm the kid in the McQuarrie episode. This didn't happen.
No.
So Joe has to wait. He has Alan wait there. I think he even it's uncertain as to whether they actually left and came back, but bottom line is, Joe is so overwhelmed in the middle of the firestorm, you'd think it'd stop the whole world. Oh my God. Joe has to get his FBI-trained former police officer investigator to take the statement. I have the statement. I waived the statement on the Today Show. It's like 3 pages long. It's blockbuster. Not one legitimate reporter contacted me to find out what was in the statement because I had it exclusively. The statement blows apart the whole case. I'm the kid. I know I'm the kid. I remember Jerry saying he would call. I remember there being a locker door slam, which only the kid who was there could possibly know because that was what Mike said was his signal to Jerry to knock it off, was to slam a locker, which doesn't indicate you saw, any kind of rape or whatever. But the point is, and he recites the incorrect date that's being reported in the media at the time. I mean, of course, everyone's saying March 1st, 2002. He says, I remember this happened March 1st, 2002. Well, he gets the year wrong, but the March part, interestingly, is not wrong in his memory. Here's why. Because by the time Jerry calls Alan, it's March. So he's remembering March as the call from Jerry. The call from Jerry is way more significant than taking a stupid shower with Jerry in the Lash building. So so Alan comes forward, provides this statement, highly credible, totally exonerating him. But then the perfect storm. That night, Joe Paterno was fired. Grant Spanier is fired. The whole world turns upside down, and lawyers start looking for Jerry Sandusky accusers. And as it turns out, in one of the great twists of fate of this whole case, Alan Myers' mother used to work for a lawyer by the name of Andrew Shubin. And Andrew Shubin ends up representing 9 of the 36 guys who got over $100 million, one of whom is Alan Myers. Alan Myers doesn't testify. In fact, he goes into hiding. Oh, no. In the middle of the trial, he testifies later at one of Jerry's appeal hearings. He doesn't even remember, allegedly. He doesn't remember anything, which is very convenient. That in the middle of the biggest trial in the modern history of Pennsylvania, and his best buddy is on trial for his life, he doesn't remember where he was. Oh, my God. Here's what really happened. Here's what I believe really happened, and this is through extensive investigation. I believe that what really happened was that Andrew Shubin started contacting anybody that he knew had a connection to Jerry Sandusky. He had this connection to Alan Myers' family. Sure. Jerry even remembers dropping Alan Myers off at Andrew Shubin's law office at one point so that his mother could take him home. What happens here is Shubin. And you gotta remember, the media is doing Shubin's work for him.
Exactly.
He's convincing the whole world that Jerry's a pedophile.
Oh yeah, it's done. Yeah.
So all Shubin has to do is say, hey, I think there's a lot of money in this.
It's done.
And all of a sudden, everyone's feelings start to change. Now, Alan, to some credit to Alan, I think Alan decides, I can't do this unless Jerry's convicted. I'm not going to be part of Jerry's conviction. But once he's convicted, I'm happy.
I'll take my cut.
I'll take my cut. Okay. Right? So that's why he goes into hiding. He doesn't want blood on his hands. He goes into hiding. Oh, no. And by the way, this is a key reason for why the Bob Costas interview fiasco happens. Because Joe Amendola thinks he's got Alan Myers in his back pocket. So he thinks he's in a position of strength, and he decides, sure, I'll let Jerry talk completely unprepared on the phone with Bob Costas, and it ends up being a total disaster. And then Alan Myers flips after that because everyone thinks that Jerry is guilty. And so Alan flips but doesn't testify. The prosecution tells the jury, in one of the biggest lies you could possibly imagine, Joe McGettigan says to the jury the identity, because he's probably wondering, if one of these jurors is thinking, where's the victim from the McQuarrie episode? I mean, the kid never heard about this case? That's not possible. You couldn't find this guy? He tells the jury the identity of victim number 2, the McQuarrie victim, is known only to God. That's what he says to the jury. No, they knew damn right well who the victim was. They didn't like his story. Right, exactly. They hated his story because he was already on the record saying Jerry's the greatest thing ever. And by the way,
and he's a Marine.
Oh, speaking of the Marine thing, here's what a great criminal mastermind Jerry is. So if he's guilty, this is brilliant. So Jerry, in the midst of this investigation, decides he's going to retire from the Second Mile charity to take the heat off of him. Right. In his retirement letter, he mentions one kid from his history at the Second Mile as the perfect example of why he's glad he did this, the great success story of the entire Second Mile. Guess who he mentions? Alan Myers. Not only does he just mention Alan Myers in this letter, which was a public letter, he uses a photo of him and Alan together at Alan's wedding in Alan's Marine Corps uniform, where Alan and Jerry are arm in arm at Alan's wedding. Now, what sex abuse victim invites their abuser and their wife to their wedding as a married Marine, a Marine, and then doesn't object when Jerry uses his photograph. And after that photograph is used, Alan is still writing letters to the local paper supporting him. So it's not like, Alan would have said, "What the hell are you doing using my photo of, if I'm using the Stockholm syndrome, which is bullshit anyway."
Yeah.
But the whole idea that he's been under Jerry's spell, it's preposterous. He doesn't fit anything close to the profile of somebody like that.
And this is what started it all. This is the origin of the whole thing.
Well, I believe I've just blown apart those two pillars.
Yeah.
Mike McCreary and Aaron Fisher.
Yeah.
And after that, everything is
That's it.
science fiction.
Forget it. Yeah.
It's science fucking fiction.
Well, yeah.
After that.
It's a cash grab is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. So everyone says, how could 36 be lying? How could only 36 want millions of dollars?
Right.
I'm amazed there aren't more people
right, exactly.
that got hip to this scam. And again, I feel responsible for at least a couple of them. And so, and what I'm telling you is really, it's not the tip of the iceberg, but it's not the whole story.
The money came from Penn State, basically. Is that what happened? They just all these kids sued Penn State and they got paid big time.
Oh yeah, without any vetting. There was no vetting. In fact, nobody vetted anybody.
Oh, jeez.
No, but let me. This is another chapter of this whole thing. So I believe Andrew Shubin is the key to this whole case. Lawyer for 9 accusers, including Alan Myers and 3 of the trial accusers. So he's at the epicenter. So I have a guy who is a big Jerry Sandusky supporter. Went to the Second Mile charity, and by the way, what time is it? Can we stop for a second?
Yeah, we're cool. 12:17. We can edit this out. It's fine. 12:17. What do you got to do?
Okay, we're gonna need to wrap up pretty soon. But
yeah, I need to too.
Okay.
Yeah, let's say for me 20 minutes would be good. 15.
Maybe, something like that.
Okay.
All right. So pick it up with.
You've done it, man. We'll just tie it together. But I think you've done it.
So anyway, So this guy who was a Second Mile charity kid who knows Jerry's innocent, known him his whole life, went to the trial, was told by Matt Sandusky the first day of the trial, Matt, the adopted son who later turned on Jerry in the middle of the trial, that Jerry is innocent, that this is all bullshit. He comes to me and says he wants to go talk to Andrew Shubin and confront him because he's convinced that Shubin is the epicenter of this whole deal. I said, well, if you're going to do that, confronting him is not going to do anything. Why don't you claim to be a victim and see what happens? This is all over Facebook messaging. We're not even having a phone conversation.
Oh, wow.
And I'm thinking nothing's going to come of this.
Oh, wow.
The next day, I get a Facebook message from him saying, it has been done.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, what? What has been done?
Oh, wow.
He went to Andrew Shubin and pretended to be a victim.
Oh, my God.
This started a 3-year-plus sting operation that was incredibly poorly organized. But he, I believe legally, recorded almost all of his sessions with Shubin and recorded almost all of his sessions with the therapist that Shubin sent him to. The same therapist that treated these 9 other accusers, including Matt Sandusky. And what we found was astonishing. And I'll just give you a couple of quick highlights. But effectively, Shubin gets told this story, which is a nonsensical story. I had nothing to do with the story that was made up. This guy told Shubin that Jerry had abused him in a park behind Joe Paterno's house, which is just absurd on his face. Because I wanted the whole thing to be as organic as possible, and I actually wanted it to be preposterous to see what they would do.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And in the second meeting, we have audio of Shubin, and he's at his computer. You can hear the keyboard, and he says to him, "All right, let's go through your story." And you can tell he's reading from bullet points, and he's reading like 6 or 7 bullet points, but none of them are the accuser's story. Not even close. He's just making shit up. And then he references, and you told me about this story in the park. We'll talk about that later. And so basically what Shubin is doing here is, look, here's your real story, because this is a story that Penn State might pay money for. And the accuser's shocked, but he goes, oh, okay, fine, whatever. And we have hours of, it's fascinating to hear Shubin, because Shubin, in theory, should have more evidence about Jerry's guilt than anybody. I mean, he's the lawyer of 9 accusers.
Oh, yeah.
And his understanding of the case, his view of the case is ridiculous. It's more ridiculous than Aaron Fisher's book. I mean, he has no clue. And it's really interesting is at one point he confesses that the prosecution hated him because his accusers kept changing their story. And that the prosecution told him that they thought that his accusers were angling for money. Now, again, it's a paraphrase, but it's a pretty accurate paraphrase. So I actually think that Shubin believes Jerry is guilty, but he believes it because he's made a ton of money from it. And I also believe it because, and this is going to sound crazy, but Shubin is a University of Pitt grad. And University of Pitt and Penn State are huge rivals.
Yeah.
And he revels in the fact that he makes his living from Penn State students getting caught in DUIs. And he hates Penn State.
Oh, my God.
And largely because he went to Pitt. So I think that played a significant, and the fake accuser believes the same thing, that the Pitt thing played a key role. The therapist was maybe even scarier, and this goes to the vetting. The therapist says to the accuser that she never vetted any of these accusers, that was Andrew Shubin's job. And Shubin said to the fake accuser that it was the therapist who vetted the accusers for him. So in other words, the therapist thinks Shubin is doing the vetting. Shubin thinks the therapist is doing the vetting. Nobody's doing any vetting. Everyone's just believing everybody because...
It's just intake.
It's just it, yeah. And then my favorite part of this whole deal is, because of the Newsweek story, we were told by Newsweek, which we thought was going to publish this whole thing, that it'd be a good idea to end the sting operation, because the sting was going to be a huge part of the Newsweek story. Bob Rowe loved it. It was like the star of the whole thing. That was our
editor.
Yeah, the Bob Rowe editor of Newsweek at the time before he got fired.
Right.
Then he gets the sting. We were told, why don't you shut it down? So we shut it down, and in shutting it down, Shubin actually sends an email, multiple emails, to the fake accuser, putting him in touch with the Attorney General's office so that he can file a criminal complaint against Sandusky in the future, because he's outside the statute of limitations to file a civil complaint against Jerry. This is years after he first came to him. But in shutting down the sting, I told him, why don't you tell the therapist that you no longer believe you were abused by Jerry and see what happens. And so he does, and this therapist, this super lib, everyone's been abused. Oh, by the way, he had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder by a psychotherapist, even though nothing actually happened. All of Shubin's clients were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Of course.
Because that's a way of excusing bad memory.
Of course.
So this woman says to the fake accuser that you not believing that you're a victim of Jerry is actually further evidence that you were a victim of Jerry, because that's the way a victim's mind works. And I'm like, oh my God. So you literally can't tell a therapist that you were not abused without them saying, aha, this is proof that you were abused. Anyway, the bottom line is, we could not have proven this. I mean, you're trying to prove a negative, which is always impossible.
Right.
Especially when the rules are the way that they are in this. I mean, the rules here, I'm a skeptic of man-made catastrophic global warming, and I always find it frustrating that no matter what the weather is, I mean, it's raining like hell right now here in drought-stricken California, has been for weeks. No matter what the weather is, it's evidence of climate change, global warming.
Right.
This is the same
Exactly.
thing.
No matter
what the evidence is.
Jerry Sandusky raped a whole bunch of boys.
Right.
That's right.
It didn't happen. And I just wish people would take a look at this.
It didn't happen.
Because it's all a myth, and it's not close, and I would bet anything I have on it. And all I've ever asked is just somebody give this a fair hearing, because it's the greatest story that's never been told, and the biggest injustice I've ever heard.
I think one of the first things you said to me on the phone the other night, the first time we'd met was just a couple days after I'd first heard about your work. You said that Thad, you said Jerry Sandusky is innocent, and you paused, and you said, and it's not even close. And as a skeptic of this from the beginning, even I was shocked by that. But I checked, I vetted, and I've had other people vet this. I've been checking on you and your work for many, many days now. And after this especially, there is no doubt about it. Now, here's the thing. Jerry Sandusky is currently the resident of a Supermax prison. Am I right?
I don't think he's still in a Supermax, but he's going to die in prison in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, he got a 30 to 60 year sentence, and he's 75 years old now?
He's done. Yeah, it's over.
Maybe. I mean, is it really impossible?
It's impossible because you have everyone invested in the myth. You're trying to convince a colony of 5-year-olds that Santa Claus doesn't exist. Good luck with that. There's no one has an incentive. The only shot he would have is to get this in a federal court, where they don't care about re-election, they don't care about Pennsylvania politics. A federal court, I think, would look at this purely from a due process standpoint and go, what the fuck was this? I mean, there are some amazing things that I haven't even told you. Like, for instance, victim number 8, some people might be wondering about the so-called janitor episode where janitors claimed that they saw Jerry abusing a boy. There are so many problems with that story, which has changed. One of the key witnesses never testified. The location of the incident changed. But here's the most amazing fact. The actual witness never testified. The judge allowed in hearsay testimony under some bizarre exception.
Hearsay testimony.
Under some bizarre exception that I don't even understand. But here's the best part. The alleged reason for the hearsay testimony was that the actual witness had dementia. Except the prosecution decided to interview said janitor. Now, this was not amazingly brought up at trial for reasons that I will never understand, but we have a record of that interview. It was recorded. And he was asked 3 times, did you see Jerry Sandusky? And the guy says 3 times, no, I never saw Jerry Sandusky. This is the only witness for this episode. And so what I believe happened is, maybe the guy wasn't fully with it, but the prosecution decides post-interview he has dementia. Because why would you interview him to begin with if he has dementia? So he gives you the wrong answer. Now he has dementia, but we're sure this is true. And we have these hearsay witnesses that their stories are convoluted and don't make a lot of sense. And one of them mysteriously doesn't even testify at trial. And Jerry gets convicted on 5 counts based upon that hearsay testimony. And by the way, not only is it hearsay testimony, there's no date for this episode. There's no victim for this episode. There's no witness for this episode. There's literally nothing. This is one of the major counts Jerry Sandusky got convicted on.
Jesus.
So right on that alone, you've got...
It's not even close.
It's not close.
It's just not close. There's a man in prison who will die there. He's innocent, and it's not even close. Well, we'll see after this. We'll see, John. We'll do some things together, and we'll work on this. Who knows? I mean, if nothing else, you have done some of the most incredible journalistic work I've ever seen, and it has had no real media outlet, maybe until now. But I'm proud to do this, and I'm honored that you did it, and I'm thankful that you came here and did this, and I hope that I know people will listen to this, and I know that people will do things about this now. I think this is gonna eventually be a game changer. I really, really do.
Well, good luck with that. I appreciate you hearing me out. I'm skeptical. If people want more information, just go to my website, www.framingpaterno.com. Again, that's figurative, not literal. I'm not a conspiracy guy. Framingpaterno.com.
Yeah, thanks, man. This is great.
Thank you.
This was the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To support the show and become a member of the Unregistered community, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.